in my opinion, the original intent of that ability. So for them to go out of the way to make sure that it doesn't work that way and then cause this collateral in the process, I think is a clear indication that it should be walked back. I mean, obviously, Nakima's my girl. God Empress reign forever. But the problem that I think that is in play here is that it affects so much else beyond just Enraged by Insolence.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Buckle up. We have got 2.5 hours of Malifaux. Ray hosts 3 of the best players in the US discussing Gaining Grounds 1. They go in depth on every part of Gaining Grounds 1, from the new strategies and schemes to the FAQ, as well as the errata. I think you'll find it interesting, the things that they like, some of the things that they don't like. I think you'll find, I was surprised at the rule clarifications that they think created new problems. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy.
Playing a tabletop strategy game allows you to unplug and test your skills against friends. Every week, Third Floor Wars delivers useful strategies, discussions, battle reports, and reviews to tabletop games like Malifaux. If you want to get better at the games you already play, or discover the games other people are playing, you are in the right place. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk broadcast.
All right, welcome everybody. Ray here on the Third Floor, and today it's all about the M3E FAQ, errata, and Gaining Ground Season 1. Now, hopefully you all heard Craig interviewing Kyle and Matt about their goals and design decisions for what they changed. And if not, be sure to check it out on your favorite podcast streaming platform. But today's look is going to be from the other side of the fence. We have 3 stellar players of Malifaux, and you may be familiar with them. We've had all 3 on the show before. You'll be looking forward to hearing stuff coming up from Andre soon, if you have not already by the time this podcast drops. Now, our first guest is going to be Cody Hyatt. He's the #1 ranked wildcard player in the US of A. Cody's been on a few times, most recently with our NC Grand Tournament Path to the Podium. He just can't stop decimating his opposition. Cody, welcome back to the Third Floor. You've recently moved to Florida. How are things going down there?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on, Ray. Shout out
Absolutely.
to the floor heads, yo. Florida's good, dude. It's nice and warm down here. I feel bad for you poor bastards up there in the cold.
It's actually fairly warm up here right now.
Well,
like the cold decided to vanish out of nowhere.
It's getting too hot down here, so
you're
coming
in Florida.
Back. But now Florida's great. I'm living in South Florida, which has always had a problem with gaming. I used to live down here like 4 years ago.
Okay.
But Malifaux's making a surge here. Like we had a St. Pete tournament a couple weeks ago, and there was 10 players, which is good for Florida. And like all of the players started playing in December. So I think it's a good testament to 3 growing the player base.
Very nice. All right, next up we have Jesse Watson. He's one of our NC henchmen from the Raleigh-Durham area. I can speak. And my rules interpretation co-collaborator. Say that 3 times fast. I can't even say that statement once. Jesse and I have had more debates over rulings, beta power levels, and the like than any other person I've talked to about Malifaux. And somehow we're still friends, I think. Jesse, welcome back to the Third Floor. Have you made the jump into the Vassal with the current COVID situation?
Friends? Is that what we're calling this? Okay.
No.
Okay, that's fine. Well, we're working on it. We have a lot of people who weren't using Vassal before. So this last week, I've had a couple different games that have been like, let's get on, let's play Henchman Hardcore and just walk through how the buttons work. Everybody's excited about auras for measuring. They're great.
That is fantastic.
Yeah, so I think we're working on it, and then the next couple of weeks we're going to have a lot more Vassal play. And I've been seeing that the Malifaux community around the world is really jumping on that, so that's pretty cool.
Nice. Do you think we're going to do any kind of like local league stuff, or maybe even try, heaven forbid, doing a tournament on Vassal in this time period? Or is that you think that's a little lofty, or what?
We had a league that was just starting up when all this hit, that sort of crumpled. Its structure was going to be face-to-face. At the moment, I'm going to have to talk with Marcus Moore, who's our newer henchman in the area, who's trying to do a lot of building up the community. And we're going to see what we can come up with. for during this time.
Sounds good. And a big shout out to Marcus, because he has been doing a phenomenal job demoing games and setting up and bringing people into the community. I've never seen a man so passionate about demoing games before, but this guy, it's like, if you have any interest, you're in the Raleigh area, you're in the Durham area, reach out to Third Floor Wars. We'll get you in touch with Marcus. He will absolutely sit down and play a game of Malifaux with you. And last but certainly not least, we have Andre Demings. You may remember Andre from his crushing victory at LVO running solo Nekema. He's a powerful force from Texas, and I am dying to know his thoughts on the changes to inhuman reflexes, among other things. Welcome back to the Third Floor, Andre. How's the Texas meta holding up right now?
Well, you'd think we'd get hit harder because so many of us were Neverborn players, but actually we're holding up pretty okay. Couple of us jumped ship to Rezzers, and amidst COVID, we've all started doing Vassal games. So as far as resiliency of the meta goes, I think we're doing ourselves proud.
That's awesome. All right. Well, gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you all on board. As I said at the start, it's all about the changes that got dropped with GG1. And we're not going to be talking about this from the perspective of a meta solution. We're not here to be like, these are the new things you're going to be wanting to taking. This is going to be more of a reaction style podcast. We want to talk about what's working for us and what's not, what we think were hits and what we think were misses. Now, I know it's going to come up talking about the meta and how it's evolving, because obviously it's a very relevant thing, but we're going to try to just focus on feel. So with that being said, let's jump straight into Gaining Grounds. Now for this episode, we're going to focus on the big thing in Gaining Grounds, which is obviously we have new strats and schemes. We have 4 brand new strategies and 8 new schemes. You want to talk about a shakeup? Well, we got one. And I want to start with strategies, and Cody, let's start with you. And how do you feel about the new strategies that have been released in GG1?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. I think this is one of the better selling points of Malifaux. The fact that the season change really shakes up everything you were playing and thinking about before. I'm excited about these 3 of these strategies. Maybe we'll talk about that more as we go through. But yeah, I was all in on Explorers. I painted every model on Explorers, and I was like, for the next 4 months, nothing but Explorers. And then GG1 drops, and it's like, I got to get back in the dojo. I got to figure this Outcast stuff out. So yeah, I'm excited.
What are the 3 schemes or the 3 strategies that are the big things for you? What are you really enjoying about those?
Well, Symbols is great. Symbols was in 2, and it's great, and it's surprisingly deep. When you first read it, you're like, I just got to get over there and pick stuff up. But there's also there's a lot of different strategies you can implement. You kind of play D for a couple turns with just having one model trying to run. There's a lot of complexity there. Same with Corrupted Ley Lines. I really like that. I think it's pretty deep, and I'm excited to play it more. Yeah, I think Public Enemies is trash, and I hate it. But I also hate Reckoning, and this is just kind of
So there's a little bit of bleed over to
Reckoning. So yeah. I don't know if you want me to go into that. Whatever.
That's fair. So it would be fair to say that you feel, because Symbols is the only one legitimately returning. Symbols of Authority was an M2E, and actually I believe when you came into Malifaux and M2E, Symbols was the thing. So you jumped right into that, and that was what you played until its completion, and then we shifted gears to M3. So. Yeah,
that was the only way I could get wins, is just have Venom Stalker get Symbols while I lose attrition. Yeah.
I mean, that's fair. And I think he still basically does the same thing now.
Yes, sir.
So Triumphant Return then, the minor modifications that was made to Symbols, you think work well?
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely when you read it, you don't realize how much you're on a clock. You really have to be picking up that marker on turn 2, and that's difficult. Getting there, picking it up, and there's going to be a lot of different interesting strategies about deploying all 4, especially in corner deployment where you actually have a lot of space you can put them.
Right.
I can see a lot of interesting strategies where you still put them off on the flanks, so getting 2 is easy, but getting 3 is hard, and I think that's the break point. Going from 2 to 3. If you can keep someone at 2, then I think that's how you win this strat.
I agree with that statement. Talk to me about Recover Evidence and Terra.
Oh, she's competitively irrelevant in GG1. So.
Oh, you just think period in GG1 she's not going to bring the goods, huh?
competitively irrelevant.
Competitively irrelevant.
You can still play her.
Have some fun with her and rock it out, but don't bring her to a tourney solo and expect to win, huh?
You can play her. I'll say this: you can play her in Symbols of Authority and Corrupted Ley Lines if the schemes are a few of the deader ones with Vendetta and Hidden Martyrs, because Scion of the Void is still the best Vendetta model in the game, and he's pretty good at Hidden Martyrs too. So if you really want, you can take her for that.
All right, hot takes from Cody coming on the Terra plays there.
Now, Jesse.
We have Corrupted Ley Lines has a bit of might be a little bit of a salt mine for us, because we actually did some testing together, because I was part of the playtest and NDAs and all that jazz. We did Corrupted Ley Lines playtesting in the beta, and then out of nowhere there seemed to be this last minute adjustment to the whole strategy. How do you like how it's evolved?
I do not like the timing of what you laid out. To be even more explicit, we played something like hours before the drop.
It's fair.
And our version was completely different from what came out. And so that bugs me from a design perspective, because I don't know how much testing really went into it. And I think in the end result, I was more bothered by that, and the strategy still basically works. I think there are still some what I call blue screen of death scenarios, however, that need some resolving. What if I bury your last significant model? And before you say, that's highly unlikely, play against marshals when they're bringing a bury list.
Yeah, that's a feature.
It could be a thing. And so it bugs me, but I've come to terms with it, and I think it's an interesting strategy that's going to have a lot of back and forth. I like symbols and recover evidence. They're very clearly trying to structure it out and make you take your time scoring the strategy. I want to see how it plays out and how many times people have that sit and fiddle scenario.
Yeah,
where my model is where they need to be.
Now, what do I do with it?
I do a jig, because there's not much else I can do from here.
And I've already run into this problem. I had models in position ready to do their thing, and I just didn't want to do anything with them because they were where they needed to be. And we've had conversations about that, you and I, about, things that when you have a strategy or you have a scheme or anything in a game that like your purpose is to do nothing with what you have, that it doesn't feel good. Moving on, we have Public Enemies, which seems to be a no man's land of kill and be killed. But it also feels like a very win more strategy. Andre, what do you think about that?
I would actually disagree with that. I feel like Public Enemies bring something to Reckoning that Reckoning obviously didn't have, and that is, not only must I kill my opponent, I must survive to the end of the turn while having killed my opponent. Because usually you'll get those first few big activations out, 1, 2, or 3 activations, and that's where all your killing happens, and then everyone devolves to scheme running in the last few activations. But with this one, if I have a mature that kills something early, I have to feverishly keep him alive to the end of the turn, and that adds a lot more, I would say, nuance to the strategy in comparison to Reckoning, because not only do you have to kill people now, you have to stay alive to do that, and so that changes what models you're bringing, because you can bring a big, murder machine like Langston or something like that, but if you're not bringing somebody to back him up, like a Guardian or something like that to take some of the heat off him, he'll just go down like a sack of bricks, and then you don't get any points for the strategy.
Right, because at the end of the day, regardless of what you killed, unlike in Reckoning where all that mattered was that it died, here when something dies, you get those bounty tokens. And it's the bounty tokens that determine whether or not you score victory points. So this shift to tankier crews, what I like to call bruisers. I talk about this a lot in my 10 Thunders chat. The bruiser model is the model that can put out the damage, but can also take it, but isn't as good as a dedicated damage dealer and isn't as tanky as a dedicated tanker. Mm-hmm. It's kind of that point, that middle point. And so that's what we need to start looking at for Public Enemies, you think?
Oh, absolutely. Having already played, because I did a lot of the beta testing for Public Enemies as well, having to hold those tokens until the end of the turn made me start to seek, masters that weren't Nekima, mostly because we just can't guarantee that we'll be alive at the end of the turn. Like a lot of what Nekima would do would be like last ditch like, I'll kill this, I might die, but it's going to be worth it. But you can't do that here. So starting to seek models that have a lot of tankiness to bring to the table and then have decent, respectable killing power is what I've been seeking, for public enemies, because you need to. And the other part of it is not having like one or two big beaters, because they can't hold all the tokens because they'll give them all up to score a point. So you want to spread out your tokens so that you can score turn to turn and keep those models alive once you get your tokens.
Do you think that this is going to encourage elite crews or not elite crews because of that very concept?
Because you have to stay alive until the end of the turn? I mean,
Well, because you don't want to have all your tokens loaded up on one or two models because it makes those models a liability. Do you think that means that we're going to see a little bit more breadth of hiring, that, more 7-8 model crews and less, 6-7 model crews? You know what I mean?
Well, at least for me and the Texas meta, we've always run elite. Models that die are just a waste of stones as far as we're concerned. And so we've been tending towards elite anyway, both for the fact that they can stay alive to the end of the turn more likely, as well as less likely to give up the bounty tokens in the first place. So I think as far as a killing strategy is concerned, this will definitely lean towards elite crews, in my opinion.
Can I jump in on public enemies because I loathe it?
Yeah, absolutely. What you got for us?
Yeah, so the reason I loathe this, well, I hated Reckoning because it doesn't force space. I think strategies that don't force you to go anywhere are a little weird, because you can have just standoff matches that, like Jesse and I have definitely had, where you just sort of stand in each other's deployment zones because you don't want to concede points to gain points, especially now that if you kill something and die, you score no points. I think this strategy is pretty terrible because it's pretty easy to write a list where you have to table me to score the 4th point. And then when you add in the fact that your models can die before they score the point, and you can sort of overscore on a model, like if you bring a double master, it's pretty easy to write a list where you have all 9 or higher stone models and then a bunch of 1 or 6, so that even if you do, say, kill a master on turn 3 and you get your 3 points, you only needed 2 this turn because you didn't kill anything turn 2 because it didn't let you. And then that point's getting wasted. Because you scored 3, you have to remove all the tokens off of a single model, right? Even though you can keep it on different models. So there's lots of easy ways for you to just bleed points. So I think the average score on this strat is going to be like 1.8 or something, just to make up a number. And I think the reason I don't like this strategy is because it is not going to have a lot of differentiation. So Jesse, you're the ed sci PhD. So that's the right term, right? So like when you're designing a question in like a test, right? Differentiation is like the difference between, is my question predicting, like, are the A students getting it right and the F students are getting it wrong? If so, then you have something that is providing differentiation. I don't think Public Enemies does this because it's going to be such a low scoring strat, which may be good for the game because, differentiation isn't the only thing that matters. And it's good that it does require you to bring different crews, but I hate it.
My sort of partner concern to that, I'm not spitting quite as much as Cody is, but I'm not a fan of it because I think it narrows the options at a highly competitive level. I think this is much more narrowed in terms of what lists could possibly work. And Andre, you were getting to this where you've got to be able to survive and kill. Okay, so you just cut out half your keywords in a faction, just off the table, period. Cannot do. Like I look at family and guild and I'm like, yeah, they can murder and die back. And it's just like, they're just going to give up these points. Like I can't. And so I have to focus. So I think what it ends up doing is narrowing your options quite a lot into what is actually going to be competitive. And I don't like to narrow options. I like to remain with a flexible game. I think it also moves closer to the, what you see in other war games where so much of your game is decided before you put models on the table. It's decided in the list you build.
Right, because like if someone drops a levy on the table, just as an example, who's like the supreme kill engine and never dies.
Right, they bring a demise replace list.
Yeah.
Yeah, which has like 8 or 9 public enemy points.
Yeah, period.
So you have to table me to get the 3rd point, which is
yeah.
So translation, Outcast don't play Levy. He sucks. He's terrible into public execution.
Yeah,
don't ever bring him. So let's having both sides of that coin there. I want to move on to schemes because like this is the second half of that equation though, right? So like we've addressed the concerns about why, public executions is either good or bad, depending on which side of the coin you're sitting on. But the schemes are supposed to kind of make that up, right? So Andre, I'm going to have you start off here. Like, and let's go ahead and stick with the tone of like public executions. If you were playing into a public execution pool, what are some of the new schemes that you would want to see versus like a scheme you would like, no, don't bring this here. It's not wanted.
I get the feeling I'm probably the beater lover in the room, but I like Let Them Bleed. The idea, both as the user and defender against Let Them Bleed, ironically adds a lot of nuance to the game because it's, you target the two biggest, beefiest models that aren't the master, you beat them down to below half, you score the points. It sounds simple, but the problem that they run into is that if you have to get them below half but not kill them. So you have to, in the same way as public enemies, you have to be able to survive saying, hey, I'm going to punch you in the mouth, but not so hard you die. And then score that first point. And so I think that tends towards, making decisions you wouldn't have made otherwise. Like I've played games with this already where I've had like a brutal emissary stomping around and then he drops to like one wound and then the enemy just stops attacking him. And I'm like, what are you doing? And so over the course of the turn, I start dumping healing into him. And by the end of the turn, he's back up to 6 health. And I'm like, oh, you're trying to run, Let Them Bleed. And so they now have to sit down and be like, well, do I let this guy live and try to score? Or do I try and kill him off just so I don't have to worry about him? Because it's like, if I have to run all the way across the map to go stab that guild steward or domador to make sure I can score Let Them Bleed, I'm not sure it's going to be worth it. So as a defender against the scheme, it's nice, but as an attacker, it's also fun to try and figure out what healing they're going to try and bring to get them back to above half and see if you can counter that anyway. So I love Let Them Bleed a lot. Now, ones that you won't take Prisoner. I mean, it's still garbage. It's always been garbage. It will continue to be garbage. Take Prisoner's bad. We saw the math to prove it. I know that Craig released a who's taking what schemes analysis, and Take Prisoner was like by it and far away, just like the worst scheme. And I'm not surprised. Like, it's hard to get people separated unless you already know they're going to try and run off away from their crew, and it continues to be hard to set up by itself. And then beyond that, as far as new ones, I don't like runic binding very much, unless you have like a not a bomb model like Von Strick's Totem or Angelica or something like that. Getting like the perfect triangle of scheme markers in place without the enemy just being like, oh, you're trying to run this, I'll pick it up, is very, very difficult, because having to like defend 3 different scheme markers in a triangle around a crew is just monstrously difficult to set up. So that's probably my least favorite of the schemes.
And Runic Binding was the one that Kyle and Matt split off from the original Corrupted Ley Lines, which again, if you haven't heard the podcast where Craig interviews them, they talk about this. And I kind of agree with you. I'm not a huge fan of the scheme, but I'm actually very glad that it is a scheme, and because I can't imagine that as a strategy.
Yeah, no, those main points, I'd be terrified to try to run that.
Oh, I would probably there would be so much salt, the salt mines would flow. My nickname in the NCMA would become Salt Bay. I'd just be flipping tables constantly, like, this is impossible. Jesse, how about you? What are you looking at as your favorite new schemes, or and why?
Well, let me defend some schemes.
Here we go.
No, I'm an oddball. I really am. I may be like one of 5 people who actually liked supply wagons.
All right, so I did like supply wagons. I thoroughly enjoyed supply wagons. I will die on that hill.
Yeah. I liked it. I like that. I like for the complexity to reside in the strategy, and the schemes to be a little bit more straightforward. And that colors a lot of my takes here.
Sure.
Get that out there. I actually do take Prisoner, but I also run like I run a lot of lists where I'm going to be able to obey you, basically.
Sure.
I'm going to have
so
the
you
option.
Can facilitate.
And if I don't have an obey, I'm not taking Take Prisoner, because that's silly. But if you have the obeys, it's suddenly a lot easier to do. But
would you say lure also would work in that case?
I think lure would work as well. Typically, I just say, why lure if I have a model that could obey?
That's fair.
Because I could just obey you to walk towards me like the lure. Only this time I'll make you charge and hit a friend along the way.
Sure.
Yeah. And Runic Binding, I will say something that helps it out a lot is it's 3 or more friendly scheme markers. Make a square, make a star.
That's a valid point.
And there are some keywords that absolutely will litter the table with markers. And so it's for those keywords, but absolutely it's a niche thing. Some keywords will run it, others just will never go near it. And I think that's okay for something to reside in schemes. I think that narrowing is a good place to have in schemes where you go like, yeah, I built a list that's never going to run that 5th or that 4th scheme. As long as it doesn't get down to it can only run 2 of these. I'm good with Let Them Bleed. I like the 5 that they kept. And oh yeah, we already talked about the rest. I don't like Catch and Release. Especially, and Sabotage just has way too many qualifiers.
Talk to me about Catch and Release. What about it? Like, I think we have similar viewpoints on this.
So
but I'd like to know what doesn't trip your trigger.
I like for the schemes to be consistent in what they're doing from point 1 to point 2. And Catch and Release, you just have 2 completely different games going on. And, it fits the concept of Catch and Release, but I don't like that as a scheme. Because again, I want the complexity to be in the strategy, not the schemes necessarily.
Cody?
Yeah, just to play off what you two said, yeah, Runic Binding's a dead scheme, but that's okay. It is good that it's like fine for hucksters and like whatever Jesse's stupid model is. It also the weird thing about that is 3 enemy models is that's an insane amount of models.
That's gonna be really tough.
Yeah, that's the really tricky bit. That's why it's dead. Yeah, I didn't think about the Catch and Release. That's actually a really good point that I also agree. You just gave me an opinion that I didn't know I had. That I don't like that that it's different for the first one than the second one. I think it's a good scheme.
Let me pause you there real quick and clarify. It's not that it's different. It's that it's thematically different. Because like a lot of these schemes that we have different ways of scoring between the first point and the end game point. But it's almost like they're derivatives of each other. And then the issue we have here is that this is not a derivation. This is just, hey, do this random thing. Okay, now do this random thing.
Yeah, I agree. It would make more thematic sense if it was like the second point is if the chosen model is on the enemy table half and not engaged by the model that it caught. Because then it really would be catch and release. And now it's just sort of catch and run or something. I don't know. At least then it would have sort of a narrative through line. But yeah, I get what you mean. I don't know. So my general consensus about these schemes is that the second points are a lot harder. And there are a lot of schemes where if you do not have activation control, if you do not have last activation on turn 5, then you pretty much can't guarantee that you'll score the point. And in a close game, that is a very, very hard thing to orchestrate. So I think, like you said, Take Prisoner is generally pretty dead. But then when you compare it to all these other schemes where the second point, you have to have last activation. You basically have to have it for research mission, even though it seems a little harder. You basically have to have it for spread them out. You have to have it for catch and release. You have to have it for sabotage because they just have to drop 1 enemy scheme marker. You have to have it for hidden martyrs. Hidden martyrs, that second point is way harder than you think,
It is.
You almost have to have it for claim jump because so many models have like a stat 6 or 7 lure or whatever. You basically have to have it for Take Prisoner. You in Vendetta, of course, because you have to hide that model. Well, to a less extent, but so for so many of these things, you need the activation control. So the things that stick out are the things that are going to get played more, and then you're going to have to only pick one of those schemes. I think that has where you have to have that activation control. So I am really angling towards Leave Your Mark. That is like such an easy one to score. Breakthrough. Breakthrough to me is the one that. It's like, oh, I didn't realize how good we had it in GG0 because now I'm like, oh, I really like Breakthrough, because I wasn't taking it much, and now I'm really looking at Breakthrough. So I like them overall, and I really like the like Jesse was saying, where certain schemes are for certain crews, which is cool. Like Research Mission is not for everyone. Runic Binding is not for everyone, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, just like Runic Binding, dead scheme. Yeah, it's rough, but I also, again, there are like the 5% of players that are of my mindset. And when I'm playing a Nelly game, my table is just littered. I have extra ski markers just for when I'm running Nelly. And then it's like, yeah, you're going to stumble into Runic Binding. I'm going to have just a bevy of choices on which markers I'm picking up. But most keywords are not going to do that.
That's fair. And then same thing with like, stuff like Research Mission, like when you get like a Rasputina on the table and suddenly, or a Titania even,
Right.
and suddenly it's like, oh, well, this is going to be fairly trivial for me to score. And then you look at like, pretty much every other master in the faction and you're like, well, we're probably going to pass on this one. Andre, what are your thoughts on that?
I actually like Research Mission a lot for the people that you could play it into, because at the same time, not only is it a Titania player going, oh yes, I can score this with ease, the player across the table is also like, oh, this is going to be easy. He's got markers everywhere. So I actually like that for both sides of the ball, because if it's going to be easy to score for one player, more often than not, whatever marker that player's cheekily deciding will be everywhere is also probably going to be on their own table half, at which point it's fairly trivial for the opponent to score as well. So I actually end up liking that scheme a lot. I think Leave Your Mark is a win more kind of scheme, because if I have control of the center of the table, I will continue to have control of the center of the table. Because with the initial, at least for Texas Meta, it sounds like we got a bunch of schemers here that I wasn't aware existed. But the usually there's a scrum in the center, and once somebody fumbles and crumps, and then the other team takes over, and then you have dominant control of the center of the table. And if you have that, you're already winning. So why not just score Leave Your Mark while you're at it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, I've already pushed you completely out of this area. Let me just get my free points now for doing so. So one scheme that hasn't come up at all, and I just want to touch on briefly, Spread Them Out, which is kind of the new Harness the Ley line. What are people's thoughts on that, Cody?
I think it's one of the easiest to score schemes in the packet, and it's going to be everyone's going to take this one. It's easier than Harness the Ley lines because there's so many. If you get incidental scheme drop, like it's like almost better than search, especially in corner and flank. Because if you have any sort of, like, if I play a Parker crew, I am 100% taking this because I'm going to kill a model at some point and it's going to drop a scheme for me. Now I just have to I kill 2 models and then find that nice little spot to put the third one. That's easy points.
I'd say, yeah, it's your lazier scheme, and that's okay.
I mean, you got to have one scheme that's kind of you know what? I don't want to think too hard.
Yeah, you don't have to explicitly build for it too much if you know you're going to be crossing that line. If you're bringing a gun line, maybe not.
Now, is it completely on the opponent's side, or is it just on? Can you drop it on the center line? I actually don't remember.
It has to be on the enemy table half. It does not say completely. So
you can treat this almost like a Harness the Ley line if you even wanted to.
And it's even more flexible.
Right, and that's why I think Cody's right. It's easier. I mean, it's got the 10-inch limitation, so it's limited to.
Yeah. If you're playing Tony, you're probably not running this scheme, but false claim is false claim.
Whereas Tony could just rock the socks off of the Leave Your Mark instead. So,
and to come back in on this, I feel like Spread Them Out is really easy if that's what you build your crew to do, but it's part of a meta that usually runs a bunch of beaters and then incidentally tries to run schemes. Trying to get that 10 inches apart to drop scheme markers can be a pain if you're expecting to brawl. So if you're doing like public enemies, for example, if I have to choose between Spread Them Out or Leave Your Mark or Let Them Bleed or whatever, Vendetta, Spread Them Out's not going to see a ton of pick in a killy meta or in a killy strategy, I would say. So it has its place. Like, I like Spread Them Out, don't get me wrong. But it's certainly not something where I'm like, spread them out, I'm resting easy now.
But to Cody's point earlier about, getting things to literally spread out models, if it's going to be something like Symbols,
you have to already.
Where you've got to, or Corrupted, where you've got to travel.
Or even
like,
Corrupted Idols, it's like you still got to, you're still traveling to BFE at some point. So it's like even that one facilitates because just off 2 idols alone, you can get 2 ski markers outside of 10, and then you just have to get that third one somehow. So it's like, to Andre's point, you can kind of almost incidentally score that as long as your opponent's not putting too much pressure on you. But again, that kind of comes down to how you're constructing that crew, though. So it's like, if you are going heavy elite into somebody who's got activation control, that's definitely not going to be a scheme you're going to bother wasting AP on, because you got to murder the other person's, little dudes. So for the 5 schemes that stayed, do you guys like the picks? Is there any scheme that you feel is missing? I know, Jesse, you commented earlier, I believe, that you liked the 5 that were left here, but is there any that you thought that were missing? Or that should have been, I guess?
I think they're fine. You need to rotate out. But you also need, some core ideas kept. And so I think they represented a decent range of ideas, and Vendetta and Assassinate serve very important purposes. So I'm okay with it. There's no scheme that I would argue is like, you should have kept this. It's like, well, look, things need to rotate. Things need to swap out. So
what purpose does Vendetta serve? I'm interested by that.
So when I am building as a TO, I'm trying to think very carefully about giving at least 2, preferably 3 and 4 paths to victory for teams. And so straight up killing a target is something I want to leave in there as an option, but I get really tired of putting Assassinate in everything.
Sure.
So that's what Vendetta would be for. I want to give you a straight up kill a guy option. So I might leave Vendetta instead of Assassinate and swap them out a bit. I think it also gives play to some mid-range models and gives them a role where otherwise, it's master and then whatever beaters are joining the master for the dive. This gives other people jobs. So I like it for that.
That's really cool. I didn't think about that because I never take Vendetta, but that I can understand why it's good to have it in like sort of the options. And like what Ray was saying at the very beginning, but with public enemies, I think that if TOs structure the pool, with a bunch of sabotage, spread them out, breakthrough, all of that kind of stuff that forces space, then public enemies can become an interesting game. But, if it has just like Assassinate and leave your mark, then it's uninteresting.
It's just like, okay, we got what's going on here. Andre, do you think anything that got left out or anything you would have liked to have seen stayed in?
Well, I think I speak for everybody when I say that I really missearched the ruins. No, I think for the most part, everything that they kept, I think, is good for the game in that take prisoner is the scheme that makes other schemes feel better about themselves, and the other 4 are pretty solid.
That is now the official new title of that scheme. All right, gentlemen. Well, I think overall we have a pretty solid group to choose from. I think we all agree that this, while we have varying perspectives based off of our meta experiences, of course, we feel that the scheme pools are fairly solid for GG1. That we're going to see some interesting shakeups in the meta, and that it's going to be a good time regardless of whether or not you like playing the elite BD crews or you like doing crazy jank stuff like, Jesse, or whatever broken shit Cody's going to do.
Yes, sir.
We're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to dive into this fact. All right, welcome back, everybody. Fact time. There is a lot here. Most of it feels like clarifications we needed. A few stand out, though. A couple feel like they might actually have been erratas in disguise. Jesse, you and I, together with the NC Henchman, wrote the temporary fact for our meta. And actually, a couple of other metas did end up borrowing and using that fact. So we already had a kind of idea of stuff that was going to get clarified coming into this. Was there anything that took you by surprise? We talked a lot about state-based effects, or what we called state-based effects. And for me, it was really surprising that, like, they ruled challenge, which is an example of a state-based effect that, we were like, yeah, that's totally stackable. But Last Breath didn't get that. So I don't know what's going on here. Did anything else catch you by surprise?
For the most part, no. For the most part, they actually just went with the same decisions we had, which were aired with a lot of henchmen from other metas, feedback and conversation. The state-based thing, state-based, by the way, was a term that we basically assigned to a number of these abilities that didn't define whether or not they stacked. There was just no clarity on whether or not. And the choice that has been made is to go case by case. like with challenge, to say, okay, here's explicitly the rule for challenge. But as you said, it leaves out last breath, which has the same basic problem, and is, things like that can end up being unresolved down the line. And so I wish that we had just identified like problems and created a rule solution for that, rather than going case by case on the cards, which feels more like a drift back to 2E, where you have these distinct abilities and you have to remember exactly what that card does. So I just wish we'd centralized that a bit more. There are no rules, however, that really just, well, I didn't react too badly to all the rules, but there are definitely some that create some questions. Actually, let me back up what I was going to say. But I think Andre had some particular thoughts on that.
That's what we're calling it. Particular thoughts. Yeah. So, I mean, my biggest concern with the FAQ was the enraged by insolence interpretation, mostly because it felt like like you said earlier, an errata in disguise with another model's definition. Because now to say that it's not the model that the text is written on opens the gateway for things like Sun Quang's My Loyal Servant trigger on his heel, healing the same thing he healed the first time, or Ricochet being able to ricochet into the original target because it's not the rifleman that the text is written on, is just obviously not where the original intent of another was coming from. And so
at least our perception of it.
Sure. Well, I mean, to read My Loyal Servant, it says another model other than this model is pretty clear that they didn't originally mean another to exclude the model that the text was written on, because they went so far as to clarify, but also not the model the text is written on. And so to go out of their way to be like, oh, well, we're going to make this blanket statement that ends up kind of shooting ourselves in the foot over the range of models in the game, to say that, well, Nekima can't take the attack because it's not another Nephilim that isn't dying, but another Nephilim that isn't Nekima, I feel like was a misguided attempt at bringing her power down. And I think that they're going to have to walk back at least their blanket statement on that FAQ to be like, well, we meant it here, but not other places.
So just because I feel like this is a pretty serious hot topic, I'm going to go ahead and read that particular FAQ entry just so that we can make sure everybody that's listening is on the same page. So it's in section 9 under Neverborn. It's the first FAQ entry for Nekima or Nekima, however you pronounce it. I don't know if that's been clarified or not. Someone who listens to Bayou, who listens to the Breachside broadcast, tell us what it's supposed to be. Can Nekima push and take a melee action as a result of a friendly Nephilim model being killed within range of her enraged by insolence action? And so the FAQ answer for that was no. Another always refers to not the model from which this text is written, except in those instances where the model in which another is written would not always be a legal subject of the sentence, such as another scrap marker or another enemy model. In such cases, another will never refer to the previous legal subject. So what the translation for this is, as Andre is saying, is that, so that means that if something just specifies another with no other qualifying target notifications there, without any target qualifiers there, it just means not the model that the ability is originating from.
Correct. And the problem with that is because, for like my favorite example, Ricochet off of the Rifleman, because the Rifleman otherwise would have been a legal target for the Ricochet to bounce off into. Now another means not the Rifleman, which means you're perfectly fine selecting the target again. So to shoot them and then, magic bullet JFK style ricochet into the same target and continue to deal damage, because, as they said in this FAQ, another always means not the model the text is written on, and the Rifleman is a legal target besides that because it's not, another scrap marker or things like that. So that's how that ruling now stands, and I don't think that's intended at all. I mean, obviously, I feel like Ricochet should be not the target, but within 3 of the target. But with that interpretation, that's now how that stands, and I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, my brain keeps trying to take the very last few words, another will never refer to the previous legal target, and go, but that in such cases means that only applies in reference to the earlier sentence. It's not a global. And so, yeah, it's problematic right there.
So let me throw out the question, and not necessarily to be a fire star, but that's exactly what it's going to be. Is that really a problem? So let's take the examples that we have right now. So like healing energy, 8-inch range, target heals 1, 2, 3. Then for the ram trigger, my loyal servant, another model other than this model, which is now
redundant.
Which is now redundant, within 3 inches of the target, heals 1, 2, 3. So basically what that's just saying is that if you get a ram trigger, you're going to get those 2 healing flips. Is that really that big of a deal? Like, again, with Ricochet does like a 1, 2, 3. So we're buffing the damage slightly for like a Frontiersman or a Shastaya guard. And I think there's a Bushwhackers maybe, or there's a couple of Bayou models that can do it. Is it really that big of a problem, or is it just that it could potentially be a problem because there's other things we're not thinking about? Like, where does this actually live?
I think that Ricochet is going to be a bigger problem than you anticipate, simply because it's going to come in those big places where when a rifleman shoots at someone and it's like, oops, the red, and I flipped to 2. Well, at that point, the rifleman, heaven forbid he was burning a focus there, he's going to get a plus flip to both damage flips on the same target, and a 6-stone model is going to end up dealing 9 damage, assuming you didn't red, to a single target for 1 AP, and that
does feel unintentional.
Pretty strong. Yeah.
There's also Sam Hopkins is going to light you on fire each time he damages you, and can control for the Ricochet because he's a hench. Shastar Vidya Guard are going to be rolling in focus as well, and they've got the same sort of scenario going on. I think there are enough cases where there are cheap models that suddenly just spiked in damage, if that's doable.
I don't think it matters if it's too good. It's clearly unintended, and like the first time someone says, "I'm actually going to ricochet to the same model." I mean, this happened in War Machine. This literally happened in War Machine, where a model could ricochet to the exact same model. I remember this now in the beginning of 3rd edition, where you could it was basically the exact same ability. Well, actually, pushes up glasses. I can have target the exact same model because it doesn't clarify. And of course, the purpose of rules is to sort of ease the sort of interaction between two people who could be complete strangers. And if there's ever rules that causes strain between those two people, then obviously that's unintended, which is what this does.
I think that's a really valid point, and I don't think this gets brought up often enough, Cody, is that the rules of a game, generally speaking, we're not talking Munchkin here, but the rules of a game, generally speaking, should not be encouraging animosity between players based off of lack of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the issue is here, is that it's quite obvious you can now argue that Ricochet can just double tap instead of actually thematically Ricochet. And when someone who doesn't share that perception sits on the other side of the table of you and your 3 guild guardsmen, or your 2 guild riflemen, sorry. And then you double tap 2 models off the table because you happen to have a 13 and 12 rams in your hand, and they both have focus because guild steward. That's going to be a real negative play experience, and it's going to create animosity between those 2 players, not because of anything the players are doing. The players are just playing the game, but because the rules were not clear enough to prevent this kind of misunderstanding. And I think that point probably more than anything is, or that lens probably more than anything is something we need to be careful of, especially when we're making rulings. And I think we do that when we're doing home facts and stuff like that. We're trying to find things that are going to leave as little salt on the table as possible. But this is not one of those situations.
And I guess to clarify, I believe obviously that Ricochet shouldn't work like that. But in the same stroke, I don't believe Enraged by Insolence should have worked like that either. I think the clear intention of the original wording was to say that other than the model that has just died may push up and take the attack. And indeed, to even point to earlier revisions of Nekima, she originally had something like a Mother's Rage off of the Spawn Mother, in which only Nekima could have taken the attack. So to evolve to a place where Nakima's, telling others to go fight them in vengeance, and she just stands there looking on as a proud mother or something, is not, in my opinion, the original intent of that ability. So for them to go out of the way to make sure that it doesn't work that way and then cause this collateral in the process, I think is a clear indication that it should be walked back. I mean, obviously Nakima's my girl, God Empress reign forever, but the problem that I think that is in play here is that it affects so much else beyond just Enraged by Insolence.
Yeah, this seems like a point where they wanted to errata, but they found the way to FAQ, and they might have it may just be sort of a near miss, but I don't know. Hopefully they'll clarify it soon. I'm sure, shout out to the people in the Facebook comments of this episode posting that are screaming at each other right now. But hopefully, get clarified pretty soon.
Yeah, and by and large, especially, props to Matt and Kyle. They have done a great job of responding well to the community and have providing a great serviceable product, pretty much from the get-go. So it's like when you get a near miss on something as complex as this, it's fine. It happens. There's so many iterations that you might catch in the first few times you played a game. You might catch in the first 20 games what you may not catch into the first 500 games. And I think they even make that point in their in the podcast I keep referencing, that where you talk to them. And so again, I recommend you very much go listen to that podcast, because I don't feel like this was oh my God, what were you thinking? I think that it's just an unintentional near miss that is probably pretty easily correctable, but I guess we'll see what happens in time. But we're going to go ahead and move on from that.
Jesse, I wanted to kind of circle back about something. You mentioned earlier in some of our discussion that this fact felt a little bit more like an errata at times. And I want to hit on that a bit, because I like the thought process there, and I don't necessarily disagree with it either. But what do you mean by that? And can you give a couple of specific examples regarding it?
Sure. In general, this plays out like a FAQ and is answering the blurry questions, but there are a few places where their answers to quote-unquote blurry questions are actually adding words to the book that didn't get written into the book. And I think that's a little bit of a trap, because that means somebody has to read the book and then read the FAQ, as opposed to read the book and play and use the FAQ if they hit one of those blurry, unsure spots. And I guess, an example of that would be the falling damage. So, the book does not draw a direct line between falling damage and being assigned to anyone. And a most literal reading of the book would say that no one gets credit for falling damage. Because it basically falls into the same category as hazardous. If you push them through the hazardous, they take the hazardous damage, but I don't get to claim that hazardous damage if it kills you. Well, falling, I do get to claim falling damage. And it's just one of those things that I wish that was a line in the book rather than a line in the FAQ. And there are just a couple of odd places where that pops up.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I would add that it's definitely a real pain in the butt when you have to double reference stuff. And there's no sort of, to Jesse's point, some of the errata or some of the FAQ is not only just an errata, but it's also balance decisions that are made in the sense of FAQ decisions. So there's no sort of through line.
Like the Nekama thing, for instance.
Yeah, there's no sort of through line of logic that you can just sort of read the book and then translate directly into playing the game and thinking that only the cards break the rules, because there's also the FAQ breaks the rules, which is a little awkward. I don't know. A game like this is super complicated to sum up, though. So I can't fault them.
It's not necessarily a negative thing per se. It's one of those gray areas where it's this would have been better if maybe it was put here, but just due to the literal complexity this game has, the heaps upon heaps of complexity, it's we kind of get it is kind of the thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely hard to to sort of collate all of this in your head. I'm just reading through all this FAQ stuff, and I'm like, what does this mean? Okay, what does this potentially open up problematic in the future? And Andres definitely pointed to one of the things that's problematic about just sort of whole-plated making these sort of balanced decisions and then not thinking about how it affects the rule book in its entirety.
I was going to add to that, sort of building on the complexity of things. One of the things we were trying to go to in this edition was to move away from hundreds of unique abilities and unique effects to more standardized rules. And one of the things that jumped at me here, and we tried to get at this, we've already spoken about some about, trying to introduce a status category or something like that, a state category for some of these effects like challenge, last breath, that are persistent, but they're not conditions.
Or the inability to heal is another big one.
Right. And there are a number of these. It's like, does that stack? Does it not? There's no clarity in the book. And they're handling it on a case-by-case basis, which takes us straight back to 2E, where you have to know, okay, for that rare model with last breath, what is the explicit rule for last breath? And I can't use the logic from these other very similar, effects to apply, because each one is now being treated in a unique way. And I wish they'd taken that opportunity to say, look, we have all of these things. They have the same basic problem going on. Let's add a paragraph to the book that answers that problem.
I definitely agree with that statement. And especially to take the two examples that you took, and I think we brought them up a couple of times already in this conversation with the FAQ, is like challenge versus last breath, where last breath doesn't stack at all. But challenge does, but last breath can be against multiple targets as well. So it's like it works almost exactly like challenge does until you try to do the same target twice. And so and the issue with challenge, obviously, is challenge is a bonus action. So the same model is never going to be able to challenge the same model twice. I don't think there's anything that allows that, is there?
Actually, there is.
Oh, okay.
If you reactivate a rabble riser with Molly, it can challenge the same target twice before they go.
So what happens in that case then? Do we interpret that per the challenge rule? Or do we interpret it per last breath because it's from the same model?
It specifies in the FAQ's answer, it says a model can be under the effect of two different challenge actions provided they are generated from different models. So they did actually cover their base there.
Okay. So that's a positive. So it seems like the general consensus is that they're saying, for what we're referring to, or Jesse and I have referred to as state-based effects, have to come from different sources or apply to different sources. So, last breath can go, hey, you can hit two different models, but you can't apply it against the same model twice. Challenge, you can't apply it against the same model twice unless it comes from two different sources. But again, that almost feels like we're in errata territory, and now we're back to what Jesse was saying. And why is this not a paragraph in the book about how these kinds of things work out?
Yeah, because what about false claim now? I false claim twice. Am I affected twice by the need to discard markers? Same model, same source.
Yeah, and now it doesn't. Now it doesn't, because obviously the question is, the statement everyone's going to say is, yes, you absolutely have to remove two markers. You do not get 3 markers for 2 AP for free. Yeah, I know you flip cards. You guys get what I'm saying. But
oh no. As a regular false claim user, I go ahead and discard a marker for each time I use it. But I'm sitting there looking at it every time.
But there's argument for it. Yeah, and we don't want arguments. We just want people playing games and having a good time.
If someone was trying to post up against me on the opposite side of that argument, where it was like, nope, state-based effect only happens once, I would argue that because it affects a different scheme marker every time you pick it up, that is the case in which you would have to pick up 1 marker per action.
Oh, that's fair. I would buy that argument. But again, we're kind of in more interpretation category.
Yeah.
And this is exactly how it should happen, and here's the rule that says...
You and I could go back and forth on that legally, but I think it's not the objective of this podcast.
Probably not. I think at the end of the day, we don't have a problem with the FAQ, and we think that, and I'm kind of speaking for all of us here, but I don't think there's any disagreement to be had, that 85-90% of the FAQ we don't really have a problem with. It's just the clarifications we were looking for. There's just a couple of points here and there that kind of make us go, was this an errata? Was this a change? Did this open the can of worms that needs to have its own section in the book?
I think the biggest issue is that they were inconsistent across multiple topics, like Another being a fantastic example, or the falling damage being a fantastic example, where things that are interpreted one way, clearly one way, for certain cases and not for others, means that it's really hard to use the FAQ as precedent for making other rules interpretations.
It makes it hard to solve future problems.
Right. When the FAQ comes out and it becomes more difficult to interpret ambiguous rules scenarios, that's a problem.
Yeah, there's a miss there.
It's a good line. We should get that in there.
Sure.
The power of editing.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to go over what we thought about the errata changes.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Nothing makes Malifaux easier than having the right tools. Here at the third floor, we love all the licensed Malifaux goodies from Custom Meeple. Not only are they helping support this podcast, they sell custom-made weird licensed tokens and terrain. They sell it all. Crew boxes, terrain, markers, tokens, and even a 3x3 full Malifaux board. Custom Meeple sells a complete M3E token set covering every marker and token you need to play. Custom Meeple are the source for the official accessories for Malifaux. Everything is designed by hand and authorized by Weird Games. Check them out at custommeeple.com, that's with one M, or follow the link in the show notes. Up your Malifaux game and be sure to tell them Craig from the third floor sent you. If you use the promo code Third Floor Friend, all one word, THIRDFLOORFRIEND, you'll get a 5% discount and help support the podcast. It's valid on everything except retail products and playmats.
And we're back and going right into the core rules errata. Not a whole lot here. There are a couple things that need adjustment. Obviously, we have the trigger generating a charge issue resolved now. Spoiler alert, you can't declare triggers on the action generated by the charge that's generated by the trigger. Don't know how anyone was ever confused about that. But anyways, they did a complete update to replace, which was intended just to clean it up and make it work as intended, but there's something a little extra added in there. Cody, why don't you talk to us about it?
Yeah, so on replace, there's a lot of text in the actual errata document, but I think the effectual changes are pretty small. The biggest one is that there used to be a call out in the line where if multiple models were combining into one model, you would take the highest value of the conditions that had values, and that would be the new condition value for the new model. Now that specific sentence has been removed, so the reading is that you combine all of the conditions that have a value into one new super condition with all of the new values. This obviously has huge impact on Sandeep and Hamlin, especially now. We'll get to it later. Hamlin has received a little bit of a buff in one of his models, but this is also a buff because he can have all of his rats focus with his bonus action, which just let them take an action, and then they all combine, and you can easily have rat kings with like focus 7 or something crazy like that. It's definitely not hard to pull off. And it definitely has impact for Sandeep as well, where if you're combining all of those burning into one big fire golem, you're combining all the focus. I mean, that's really good.
It seems like that's something that you might want to do.
Yeah.
For me, the one that jumped out at me was actually, I totally forgot about the Voltroning on Sandeep, and when I first read it, I was like, oh, that's an interesting buff to Corfy, because I'm bad at this game.
Yeah, so I don't know what exactly. So I've had in our local chat here, we've had a lot of back and forth about the Corfy stuff. Can you just sort of explain to me, like I'm 5, how that works? Because I don't really understand exactly how things function now. If she's like flipping back and forth between 1 to 2, I feel like most people who are not super savvy with the game could use a quick diagram.
I mean, I think I could probably use a diagram for it. So my understanding of the situation is, and Jesse, you will be my my assistant here because you probably know the rules far better than I ever will. If you're combining, then you continue the activation as, no big deal. Like, regardless of if the second core fee had activated or not, you're just going to finish the core fee duet's activation now when you do the combine. The big thing is going to be, okay, so what happens when it separates? And most of that has stayed the same. The one new model becomes a target of any effects that targeted or chose any original models, such as schemes, et cetera, et cetera. That's not something that didn't change, really. But if any of the original models had activated, all new models are treated as having activated. So if you start with the core fee duet and you split off, you're going to pick one of those models to be the original, to continue the activation that you're currently on. But the new core fee duet that just popped, the other one that you don't pick, that one is treated completely as having activated.
I would actually argue in the reverse, based on their interpretation of manipulative and when it drops. Because manipulative, as per the FAQ, drops at the end of activation because that is when the model is treated as having activated. So because the core fee splits in the middle of its own activation, while not actually having been treated as activated, both core fee get to act individually.
Ooh. That's an interesting point. I hadn't considered that.
For the listener,
all new models are treated as having activated.
Which sounds...
I think that's a tough line to get around.
Which would be great if the core fee duet was treated as having activated in the middle of its own activation, but it doesn't as per the manipulative FAQ.
That's actually accurate. That's actually a very valid point, because the whole point with manipulative was like someone had asked the question, if I activate, do I no longer have manipulative? And the answer was no, you're not treated as having activated until the end of your activation. So
same thing comes up with guard. If I try to attack you, I get, guard gets a bonus against models that have already activated. But if they're trying to do something against a model that's currently acting, that model doesn't count as having activated yet. Oh man, really? Yeah.
Okay, so
it just ends up panning out that they act the same as they did previously. They just have to backdoor their way into acting as they always have.
I actually don't remember how they used to be previously, because I never actually used that ability. My Colette list is so bizarre, but I run core fee duet and 2 core fee, so I never actually did the combining or dissembling. That was just not something that ever happened. So you're saying that it used to work that way, where it's like, hey, you could activate core fee A, then activate core fee B, they combine, become core fee duet. Core fee duet continues its activation. And then next turn, core fee B or core fee duet can activate, do its things, decombine into core fee A and B. A finishes the activation, and now B also gets to activate.
I think the most powerful application of the rules here that was and still is that you will start off with a core fee duet, activate, take 2 AP, and then split off into 2 core fee, and then the second core fee, which doesn't count as having activated, then immediately recombines and takes another turn as the core fee duet.
Oh, gotcha. Well, there you go, Cody. Summed up and simple, right?
Yeah, I understand it less now. I'll just play Levy and kill it.
I mean, that's probably the correct answer. But so that's a very good point, though, Andre. Is that we talked about ripple effects in the previous section about some of the FAQ stuff, but things not being treated as having activated until the end of their activation. That makes me wonder what else is going to fall into that category, because I would never have thought about that.
No.
With the Guild Guard is a prime example of this. If I'm disengaging from a guard that gets I forget, what's that ability called, Jesse?
Pursue.
Yeah, pursue.
So if I'm disengaging from a model with pursue, they don't get the bonus to that stat because you are not activated.
Right. It's one of those sticky points. I had to figure it out for myself just a couple of months back, and even then, it's easy to forget just looking across all this. I'm glad you called it out, Andre.
Yeah, very finicky and counterintuitive, because you're I'm going to activate, and then you do things, but you're nope, don't count.
Well, the first thing you do is activate your model.
Right, exactly.
But you haven't activated.
But you haven't activated. You've activated, but you're not activated. Not really. It's like Schrodinger's activation.
You're activating, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's like, I am activating this model, and then at the end of your activation, it has now activated. Which is fickle, but I mean, I'll allow it, I guess.
I mean, all we can do. this is hilarious. We're in the errata section, not the FAQ section, because I'm even more confused right now. But I think it's definitely a good time to remind the listener that it's the responsibility, I guess, of the players to just play the rules as worded. It's the responsibility of the TOs and stuff just to tell them how, what's the best sort of interpretation for all of these sort of questions that we're bringing up. Like, I know.
Make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. As long as we're on the same page, it's all good. Yeah.
It's a game. We're all here to have fun. We're all here to have a good time. So make the best decision you can and have fun.
And so as an active TO, here's my push to all the players out there. Please communicate with your TOs and understand where they're roughly at. And whatever they call, that's their call. Don't say that Third Floor Wars said whatever or blah, blah, blah on a podcast. Whatever that TO calls is their call. Just if you're worried about it, talk to them in advance and get square.
Yeah, and I'm going to re-emphasize that because we've had a couple of people, and please feel free to reach out to us if you are looking for an impartial answer. Or even better, throw out, self-plug here, throw out a question to us that I can answer on the Soa Tactica podcast, because that's kind of the whole, point of that podcast is I do the research and then I answer the questions as, best as we can. But we are not a rule source. That being said, we can advise how we would do things in our meta. And we advise that you do things the way you would do in your meta, and hopefully those sync up. And if you like the way we do things and you've talked to us and said, hey, that sounds cool, feel free to, carry it forth. But we are not a rules authority in any way, shape, or form. We're guys that move toy soldiers on a table. We just do it with regularity. All right, so moving on further into the rules errata, there's a little change to the damage timing. I don't know if it's actually something that is going to be of particular relevance for most things, but I just wanted to get everybody's thoughts on it. Have you guys read through that?
I have, and it's been a rules point that I've long debated on the forums, and so I'm glad to get some clarification, even if it doesn't work quite like I wanted it to.
Well, tell us what the situation was, and then how this clarifies it.
Okay, so the initial problem was resolving damage and healing that wouldn't occur in the places they would want damage and healing to occur. So the big example that I can make it most clear in is what I was calling Phoenix Troopers, which is when you give a Draka Trooper from the Freikorps Servant of Dark Powers, which would give them the rule that anytime they kill something, they heal to. And so the question was, what happens when a Draka Trooper explodes on someone and kills them? Do they heal out of death? And if you could interrupt the timing with other models having to resolve their damage, then the answer is yes, you could totally do that. But now that I have to completely resolve the Draka Trooper's death before I resolve the damage on anything they do damage to in their, death throws, now they definitely die and then resolve the explosion damage elsewhere, so healing them when they're not on the table anymore is relevant. So basically it gets rid of people being able to explode so hard they live, which I respect that decision, but, there's some cool factor loss there.
I will agree. Having, as you call them, Phoenix Troopers, I feel bad that I never thought about that. That would have been amazing. Got a paint scheme going and everything. Cody, you have your new Freedom Troopers to do now. Phoenix Troopers.
Hey.
Phoenix Free Corps. I want to see it happen, man.
Yeah. Too bad.
So yeah, overall it was important that they clarified that, and I think they clarified it in a relatively readable, straightforward way, which was important, I think, because there was a lot of up in the air on what happened first. So I think they did a good job in the damage timing rewrite there.
Awesome. I didn't even so not knowing that was a thing, I totally agree with you now. God, man, I wish I'd known that was a thing, though.
Always finding new tricks.
Always finding new. Well, not anymore. Now they just blow up, and then it's like, bee. Aw.
Well, the comedy and errors ensues when you have Phoenix Troopers on multiple sides. If I blow up and kill you, do I get the credit to heal out of death in time? And then do you then explode? And there was a lot of questions that came up. It was just like, oh, this is dumb. We just have to, die once and call it a day, and then move on.
Good riddance.
Okay. The only other one from the rules I want to kind of go over is bury. There was an adjustment to bury that's kind of interesting, but I guess it really did need to happen. And that is their laugh off planted roots and other abilities like that are now maze for the purposes of bury. So if your model with laugh off is buried, you actually can unbury it if your opponent controlled the bury, because previously I guess they couldn't, because it was a place, and laugh off says you can't be moved by your opponent. So your opponent's like, I'm going to place you there. It's like, nope, laugh off. I'm staying buried.
Yeah, I think how this was resolved before was that the unbury effect would still trigger because no. I thought it was like that the unbury effect would still trigger, but it couldn't be placed, so it would just sort of, I think it would just sort of stay in sort of this nebulous area, but it definitely seems a lot clearer now with this addition.
Yeah, because it's, and the same, and I think the thing that's interesting about it is that they specified specifically for buried only. You may unbury. So it's not like they changed laugh off planned roots or staggered or anything like that. They just said, hey, if you would be unburied, but could not because you have one of these abilities, you still can. We're letting you go. We're letting that happen there. I think that was just an unintended rules consequence that they're just like, yeah, we probably need to fix this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would come up specifically in scenarios where, like, because laugh off, thankfully, is a choice. But things like the roots, I don't know, Bad Juju has it. Planted roots, I think.
Planted roots, yeah. Bad Juju and Mysterious Emissary both, I think.
Yeah, they would actually get, like, robbed because, like, if you have, like, the Brutal Emissary bury them, he's supposed to unbury them in base contact when next they activate and pass the willpower duel. But because they were literally unable to take that bury because he's doing it, the best they could do is argue that instead unburying your deployment zone was a friendly effect, and then they could unbury in their own deployment zone. But Bad Juju doesn't want to unbury in its own deployment zone if there's a scrap going on in the center of the table, but he's just like, yep, I have this ability that I can't get around, so I'll see y'all at home. And it was not to his benefit, which I think this rewrite did hit on the nose what that ability should do.
Right.
So I think they did good here.
All right, moving into the faction errata. We have a lot going on here. And what I'd like to do is touch on each of your factions of choice. Like, we all play a variety of factions, but we also have kind of our focuses that we do. Andre, I wanted you to lead us off with your opinions on Inhuman Reflexes.
Well, I knew it was coming. I'll lead off with that. I think
soften the blow a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, if you have time to say goodbye to a loved one, that really helps helps me cope. So I feel like
you've gone through all the stages of grieving.
Exactly. I'd gotten to acceptance by the time they had released it, so it was fine. But I mean, the big issue with it, I think, is that people were so frustrated by the ability because it would interrupt their turn and mess with their plans that I think this was definitely a high public enemy. I don't know if Butterfly Jump was as impactful as everyone, screamed it was. And maybe it was, and that's fine. But with that in mind, though, they originally tried to give us Quick Getaway as the replacement for that, which was just like a suited defense-only trigger. And I thought that was nuts. And I was like, no. So the reason that it became Scamper is because I, soapbox cried like a baby to get that changed to something a little bit more usable. And I think, honestly, Scamper is still good. It's still a good ability. If you've ever played Namatucket, you'll realize how infuriating it can be. And there's still a lot of Reach 2 models that Neverborn have access to that would still want Scamper. And there's actually some scenarios where Scamper will come up where Butterfly Jump wouldn't. Like if someone's trying to cheat simple duels nearby, you can still get some positioning gimmicks in there and get an advantage. But I still think it's definitely not as strong as butterfly jump overall. But I think it needed to happen so that, there was that kind of public vindication, I guess. But that being said, I still think it brought down the power level of a lot of the more common users of Inhuman Reflexes, Nekima being a big one, because the big difference will be like if she's getting attacked, for example, by like the Valedictorian, who has a lot of high stat attacks to bring to bear, and she's only defense 5. There's a very real chance that the Valedictorian with enough focus will never have to cheat to hit Nekima, and at which point Nekima will just eat the full attack routine of Valedictorian, which would have never happened under Inhuman Reflexes. But that being said, I'm still going to take it on Nekima. I still think it's good, and between that and Spite, she still has a lot of punish for cheating to hit her if you flip low. But it definitely makes you think twice about jumping into melees with certain people, whereas Butterfly Jump would have been the absolutely reliable safety net. So as far as bringing the power level down without making it an unusable upgrade, I think they did a good job. But it's definitely making me reconsider maining Neverborn for the future.
Now, Andre, I thought there was a little bit of a missed opportunity here, considering they were going ahead and changing the upgrade. And you let me know where I'm wrong here. But to me, Neverborn is always read as a faction that excels in the melee-to-melee interactions. They just have so many rules where they get a leg up there. But so many of the Neverborn players are constantly complaining about range and how if they go into guns, all of our keywords just get stomped. We don't even have like an option. So to me, it seemed like since they were changing Inhuman Reflexes, which just made you better into melee, it helps a little bit into range, but in general, it just made you better into melee, especially if you got that 2-inch melee range like you have on so many things. Why not replace, Butterfly Jump with something like Concealment or Bodyguard, where you give cover in a bubble or something like that? Do you think like something like that would have made it where you're still taking this upgrade? But I guess you're still taking this upgrade I don't know.
Right, yeah. If someone's like, dang it, Andre, you're going to run Nekima in this tournament, and there's nothing you can do about it, then I'm still going to take the upgrade on her. But that's more so for like the Blade Rush aspect than anything else. And then there's a lot of stuff that you can get away with using Scamper in. And most of the time, Butterfly Jump was used in a melee for me. Like, I've never had a problem with shooting crews with Nephilim, because if anybody can shoot me, they're by definition in fly with me, walk, charge range. And at that point, at best, if they're a shooter, they have Gunfighter, which is still, stiff armable with a 2-inch reach. So I never had problems with shooting crews, Fuhatsu notwithstanding. And so, if that is the cry of my fellow Neverborn, then, I definitely hear how Scamper is not helping them at all anymore. But as far as what I used Butterfly Jump for as a Nekima main was in melee repositioning. So I didn't lose out much on what I needed the upgrade for, I would say, because most of the time I was already in melee. Like, if I'm getting shot at like 5 and 6 times before I've reached a melee, I already feel like I've done something wrong, because usually I'm engaged turn 1. Like, Nekima's usually taking a swing for me turn 1. And so shooting crews have never been able to be able to put down a ton of damage at that 12 to 14 inch range, because I'm usually in their face if they're in that range. So I think the in melee aspect is where I was most concerned, and that's where we lost our power.
Okay, so yeah, it sounds like it doesn't really change your strategy in any sort of way, but just brings you down a little bit, which I guess is the goal of the errata, as a definition. But
I'm going to go on my, crazy, insane thing and go, it had nothing to do with Nekima. It had nothing to do with you winning LVO with, crazy elite lists that abuse the hell out of Inhuman Reflexes. They just didn't want Marcus to have 4 different sets of Butterfly Jump on upgrades, because that shit is busted. And if you don't know it's busted, you haven't played against a good Marcus player who puts 4 Butterfly Jumps on the table and makes you just cry bitter, bitter tears. Speaking of crying and bitter, bitter tears, I heard that Stitch got nerfed into the ground. Do you agree?
No. I think Stitched A deserved it, and B are still plenty usable, and in some ways more usable.
I actually, so shock here, based off the discussions we've had so far, you might not expect this, but I agree 100% with you.
Yeah, my opinion is that they changed Stitch to the point where it should be, where it's like if you have a 12, you are going to summon the max amount of stones you get out of that 12. If you have 11, you're going to summon the max amount of stones you get out of that 11, all the way down and up, instead of sort of leaving stones on the table, if you will, to get that extra stitch, that third stitched out, just because they were so good. I think now they are good, and you will still consider the other summons based off the card you have in hand.
I actually like that angle. That's not an angle I had necessarily considered, but I agree with that. It's like Stitch were auto summons previously. Like you didn't, generally speaking, unless you already had 3. I know there's going to be some debate about this, and I actually am part of that debate because I summon Insidious Madnesses all the time. But a lot of people I knew that when talking about, it's like it's just, people just summon Stitch because they bypassed everything. Now they don't bypass anything, and now we're back to, okay, so I'll summon Stitch if I can afford that because it's still good. But if I have the card to get that Insidious Madness, I'm going to go get that Insidious Madness now because Stitch are not busted.
Yeah. Like the defense change is like the one that's like so obvious. Like, why was a sack of meat ever defense 6?
Defense 6.
That was the thing that blew my mind every time. It's like, I've killed like 5 Stitch this game, and there's still 3 on the board and turn 5. It's like, because waiting through this armor 1 def 6 is impossible.
What were you going to say, Jesse?
Just, from a grander scheme, this slightly reduces the tankiness of this keyword, and I think will push people towards, going for the Insidious Madnesses, which are awesome models in their own right.
Oh, they're incredible.
And, not trying to do with Nightmare what you would want to do with Nekima, or what you would want to do with, your brawlers. It's like, look, let Nightmare do its own thing, which is a high mobility, scheming thing. They can do combat, but there are other people whose whole thing is combat. Let them be the combat guys. And so I don't mind at all if this makes more space for those more schemy, maneuvering control models to get into play. I think it's good for the faction.
I agree. And Andre, you mentioned something that I want to touch on. You think that this actually kind of, buffs them slightly in kind of a way? And I want to get your opinion on why you think that.
The big change that makes them actually more useful, in my opinion, in certain scenarios is that because it's an attack versus willpower that is now incredibly consistent, you're actually going to get a lot more feed on fears off, because you're going to have, whatever models you throw into the melee, if they're taking a beating. Previously, Stitched would just deal their, 8 to 10 damage and call it a day, but now they'll deal a little bit less damage because they're actually affected by accuracy modifiers. But now they're also going to be handing out healing while they do it. And it also gives you very reliable opportunities to hit summons, and unbury them onto the table as well. So I think they gained, for Dreamer specifically, a lot of utility because he loves his failed willpower duels so much.
And I'm going to add on to that in addition to that, from the nature of it being a duel now that does, like you said, is affected by accuracy. We do have focus now that could potentially be something that's on there because there is some sources of focus in Dreamer's crew. And being able to hey, I've got a focus Stitched here now, puts a little bit of fear into somebody, especially because we still have the ability to take a card that's been removed from Lucid Dreaming and cheat it in, that's still, if I'm remembering correctly, that's how it works now, right? It's now cheating?
Correct.
So that's another sideways buff because now you don't have to use the card unless you need the card. And it's less hand pressure. And you're also doing one less card flip off your deck, so it's less deck pressure because now you're not doing a target number to get the ability off and then flipping your card. You're now just doing a duel. So, yes, you suffer from the defensive effects, which you should have always had to suffer from before, in my opinion. But you got so much out of that.
Yeah, it's a rare change where the addition of the willpower and all the things you were talking about, they give both the Dreamer player the feeling of a little more agency, and the people playing against Dreamer, the feeling of a little more agency, which is just sort of a perfect change, I think.
Moving to Guild, Jesse. We've gone around and around about Dashiell's power level for a while. You might have heard us mention that he and I butt heads once in a while. This is one area in particular that's been of always great contention between us, especially because I'm an Asami player and he's a Dashiell player, and so that, the Joragumo versus Executioner conversation comes up very frequently. But there's changes to the Dispatcher have kind of evened the field a little bit for us, because we both kind of feel about the same way about him now. You want to talk to us about it?
Yeah, he got better. He got a lot better. So Dashiell, I have been playing a lot of Dashiell, and Ray and I have had these back and forths, and we've just looked at games and gone, this was almost much better. He just needed something to get him, and what it was is, he's the best summoner in Guild. Okay, and if you ranked him against other summoners, he was B tier, because he was missing that something else to get him up a notch.
The consistency, really.
And I still, I've never lost a tournament match using Dashiell, but I've known every time that if I had had Asami or if I had had Sandeep in the same place, I'd have won the same game and faster, just more reliably. And that was the thing. It's like I won, yes, but he's still struggling. So what Dispatcher gives you is the answer to basically all of your needs in Guard. Now, you had two big weaknesses. Is Guard had
broken.
Guard needed to use cards, and as with every summoner, you need at least one high card. Guard actually needed reliably 2 high cards a turn. One to make sure that you got down the marker that you could summon off of, and then another to get your summon. Well, you don't need to push that so hard anymore. First off, if you would use an enemy marker, you can instead use the Dispatcher, and then if you would burn that marker, you draw a card. Now, there's a couple of avenues for doing that in Guard, but basically we've just added 3 to 4 cards a turn without too much sweat to Guard.
Seems good.
Okay, the quantity and quality advantage of your hand just improved, but also you can use the Dispatcher as an enemy marker, which is what Dashiell needs to summon off of for cheap, for reasonable price. Which means Dashiell can now much more reliably hire those or summon in those high value models, which were before, sometimes unreachable. Because of the way his summon mechanic works. So the Dispatcher got a suite of upgraded defenses, got this ability to count as an enemy marker and then give you a card for that, and increase the draw within the keyword, which means he is now your priority target. But as long as he's on the table and still alive, Dashiell is, I would say, quite comparable to the Asamis and coming up, chasing on the heels of the Sandeeps in terms of summoning quality. And so there's that. There's also an upgrade that was given over to answer the other Guild need, which was mobility. Guild has fewer movement tricks than any other faction by just sheer volume, and those movement tricks are typically short range pushes, as opposed to places, leaps, teleports, things like that. So we got an upgrade. And this upgrade, we got an adjustment rather, of no prisoners that now has, and if a minion has this upgrade and they hit an enemy model with an attack within 8 inches, they can teleport a friendly model within 2 inches other than themselves to the target. Okay, enter Mounted Guard, which is now going to ride with me up an Executioner. It's going to shoot an enemy target within 8 inches and then teleport the Executioner to end contact with that enemy target. The Executioner has now traveled up to something like 15 inches more, depending on how you count base sizes, before he's activated and is in contact with something he wants to eat. So Guard has gotten a lot of buffs, and you're going to be seeing a lot of Guard from Guild players for a little while. It's going to be a good season for them.
Do you think it's balanced, these changes? Do you think it's a little too overtuned, or what do you feel?
Well, these are definite power-ups. We'll have to see how well it plays out for balance. At the end of the day, these are still power-ups, though, that are on very squishy models. So, for instance, you put that upgrade on the Mounted Guard. Well, he's 8 hit points, not much for defensive stats, and no defensive tricks other than Demise Effect. So okay.
Blitz him down.
Yeah, I don't expect to have that upgrade by the end of turn 2 unless I'm just steamrolling you.
Sure.
And same with the totem, which, does wonders for me. But I'm going to have, he's going to have a target on his head. And it's, again, a game of how long can I keep him alive.
He's a little bit tougher, though, right?
He is a bit tougher.
Serene Countenance and Protected, I think.
Serene Countenance and Protected. But you also need him up to really get use out of him. You need him up closer to the fray. He now is much more of a second line model to get your mileage out of him. And so he's going to be closer to people who can get in and take more swings at him and deal with his friends. But I think it's good. It changes the keyword a bit. They're going to get more use out of some of their cheaper models to protect that totem. And I think it's really up the game. We'll have to see if Dashel's now broken, but he's definitely much better than he was.
How do you think this impacts the internal faction balance of Guild? Because my read as an outsider is that you play Nelly, you play Dashel, you play X, and that's how you do well. What is your take?
I know a lot of Guild players feel like Dashel is now far and away our number one master. He's a good, as with basically any summoner, he's a good generalist. By sheer AP advantage, he can do basically anything on the table. I think with the strats and schemes that we have, marshals actually have a good home now. They are my go-to for public enemies at this point. And then you've got Dashel, I would say Nelly and Lucius, depending on play. But there's also a lot of people that haven't really gotten the grasp of Nelly or Lucius. So they really are very technical keywords to work with. So I think overall you're going to see a lot more of Marshal and Guard showing up. And then you're going to have some people, the crazies like me, that are getting more mileage out of Nelly and Lucius.
Makes sense. Do you feel like these changes override, has he replaced a keyword within the rotation such that it's that keyword doesn't even have a place anymore?
I don't know if he's replaced. That's going to come down to just a lot of preference. I think he's pushed down, Sonya and Perdita. Their value's gone even a little bit further down. They're all still playable. I think you could run anything in Guild and do okay in a tournament with some work. But he's going to be, I think, a leg up. If you ran the tournaments 1,000 times with 1,000 masters and all that, I think he'd come out statistically ahead.
Pale Rider and Agent 46. They both got nerfed.
Pale Rider.
No surprises there.
Yeah. No one was surprised that Pale Rider got nerfed. Pale Rider got nerfed twice, I want to say.
Okay.
First off, the adjustment, the switch up with his bonus action, changing the multi-charge thing to be his final, and changing his final to being his mid, and reducing the damage by a lot.
Right.
I mean, it used to be something that could go up to 4 and be cheated and unresisted and ignores all reductions. Yeah, irreducible. Also added slow. Well, it took the slow completely off. And so, it's just doing a lot less. I still think it's a playable model, but it's going to see a lot less regular play, and that's good for the game overall. I think the Hatred Unleashed, the final ability, will almost never get used now. In part because it's now just a more cost, and it's going to come later in the game when you have fewer models to effect with it. Also, the alteration such that trigger, charges that came off a trigger, your melee attack no longer gets a trigger. That
reduces the overall power. Just
absolutely, yeah. It's okay. Well, I'm not getting as much mileage out of that, and that's something that was not another one of those cases where it's that was an errata. That was a big change for him. Agent 46. What they've changed with him is he can't be played the way that we used to play him, which was as a sniper. Largely, very few people go into melee with Agent 46 because he has no melee defenses. Nothing. Nothing at all. He just goes squish. And now if you want to have the anti-cheat advantage of Inhuman Physiology, you're forcing yourself to be a melee model, which turns him into hunting scheme runners, which to me is not very feel good for a 9-cost model to slowly hunt scheme runners because he doesn't have, he has one teleport that is complex and costs him AP and things like that. So I was like,
it's not.
Yeah, I think what they've really done is it's a nerf to Elite. It's not an end of the world nerf to Elite, but what they're forcing us to go more towards is mass hand attack, which they're avoiding an NPE, and I feel like driving me personally towards an even greater NPE that I have avoided in the past. So, because once I've wiped your hand, all of my models have inhuman physiology. And I have been intentionally not playing that way because I don't want to be a dick.
You're starting to feel like at the moment now, though, it's like, just go ahead and embrace it, man. Just do it.
I'm like, never mind. This is happening now. So
this is the thing. We're doing this thing now.
So yeah, I think that's going to mess with a lot of people's go-to plays for Agent 46, and they're going to have to figure out what they want to do with him. But
I think that to throw my 2 cents in on the Agent 46 nerf, I feel like that was necessary because not of his own keyword, but because of other keywords importing him and then copying their own stuff. So one of the reasons that I even, flirted with Guild Hoffman is by importing Joss with the Arc Axe and then being able to hand Agent 46 power tokens, having you can't cheat to dodge this irreducible damage axe was a lot. That was a really scary combination, and I think that overall, for the health of the game, I feel like the inhuman physiology change was probably for the best. That being said, I do see now that by forcing him to go into melee, there's a lot more to consider. You can't just spam rifleman and executes or whatever you would like to do, but I think overall that was probably a move in the right direction.
No, I think you're right. It limits people wanting to cheese him into other keywords because his actual play in Lucius. Okay, here's how it plays out. Before, you couldn't cheat. Flat, no question, you couldn't do it. All right, now you can cheat. I'm going to copy that gun. Cool, you cheated the first time. All right, I'm going to have a better hand than you. I'll probably cheat to beat you. Now I'm going to do it again, and now I'm going to do it again, and now I'm going to. It is delayed.
It hasn't really changed what his role is going to be. Like, if he really wants to be a turret, you can engineer that through hand destruction and quality of your own hand, right, even without the inhuman physiology. That's fair. Cody.
Oh, yeah.
Outcasts. They got some love, man. A little bit at least. But some would say, though, they got a lot of hate at the same time. Rusty, Ionis, Mad Dog, Ashes and Dust. I mean, we've already talked about Terra's completely unplayable in GG1 now. Bunch of nerfs got headed out. Do you feel it was too heavy-handed, or do you feel that Outcasts were like, the unsung heroes of like destruction?
So yeah, I'm gonna just run through these changes in terms of the ones that I think were good and good for the game, down to bad. I think there is a couple that are a little weird. So the Ashes and Dust change is definitely good because he was our most frequent out of keyword take. He can kind of just slide into any crew where you needed something that was unkillable by certain other crews. So he was like the most. If you were going to take outflank, you just take Ashes and Dust, and he's unkillable. So they basically changed him where he also doesn't do min 4, while he's doing it for free. Yeah, or min 3, depending on what your local area how they decided to rule the incorporeal. So min 3, sometimes min 4, depending on where you are. And so that was a good change, that he's still that unkillable model, but he's not just deleting stuff for free. So I like that change. Pride is also a good change. He had a melee sounding action that didn't have a melee icon. So he had Guitar Bash, but he couldn't engage models. So he was really bad if you were ever trying to score stuff because he can't engage things. So they kind of nerfed him and then gave him a quote unquote buff by giving his Guitar Bash an actual melee action. The Rusty Alice change was good. She went from move 6 to move 4. She just never should have been 6 to begin with. It was kind of weird that she was 6. But going down to 4 makes her weaker, but doesn't change her for me. So I think it's a pretty elegant change, because what she does for me personally is that she projects threat, and she still does that. The move forward gives her counterplay, and that you can engage her and like hit her with disengage actions and stop her from shooting you in the face. I personally, as the Levy player, don't really care about you doing that. As long as she's projecting the threat, she's doing the thing for me. But now you get to feel better about doing it. So that's pretty chill.
Matt and Kyle actually commented on that was their the nerf to Rusty's movement was specifically to prevent her from being able to disengage and shoot people in the face.
Yeah, I think it's a good change. Definitely prevents, like if your gameplay relies on engaging her and preventing her from shooting something to death, then you have some counterplay now. But most of the time I'm not building my strategy off of that. So I don't really care, so it's good for both of us. The Johan change is a little weird. I mean, it's like good. Now he can actually remove conditions. So whatever. So that's cool. The Benny change is where a lot of text comes in, because Benny, Hamlet was pretty much considered the weakest keyword in Outcast in GG0. I don't think anyone would fight you on that. I thought he still had some weird tech choices based off the matchup you're going into, but in general, he's considered kind of bad. So buffs for Benny across the board, I would say. There was one weird change in that his blade went down a stat. I don't feel that needed to happen, really. And now we get to the sad stuff. So Aeonis changed from being... So basically all he did in crews frequently was be a 10-stone tax so that the rest of your crew functioned, because you needed the pass tokens to be able to get fast on stuff,
right? So
that you could actually get your summons out. So now his ability to generate those pass tokens has been significantly nerfed. And like I said, Terra, I think this change was kind of the nail in the coffin, because like we talked about before, the strats and schemes are not very good for her. I think going into GG1, I would have taken her in maybe 20 to 30% of my games, depending on the strats and schemes. But with this change, it goes down to like 10% maybe. And I played the shit out of her. So I don't know. It definitely makes sense that Aeonis is getting this nerf, because he has a reference to True Detective on his card. So it makes sense in the first season that he was quite good, and in the second season he became dog shit.
We're in the LA season.
No.
I'm just joking, guys. I actually like season 2 of True Detective. I don't like Aeonis. So yeah, I've also sort of resigned. I've gone through all the stages of grief on this one and just came back to denial. And I feel like that's where I'll live, and I expect you guys to live in that space with me. I've decided in my worldview that the devs didn't make this change, but I'm not part of the playtest group. So some whiny playtester must just not like pass tokens and summons existing in the same crew, and they just complained about it until they made this small change at the end. And if you are that playtester, I hope you stub your toe for a month.
The most vile of curses.
Every day for a month, I hope you stub your toe. You have donkey brains. This is a terrible change. The reason it's bad is because it changes Terra from this interesting crew where you can play this tricky positioning game based off moving fast around and repositioning your crew, back into sort of crappy zip, where basically all she has now is sort of
Why
speed.
don't you just take zip?
Exactly. Why don't you just take zip in that moment? So I don't see a reason to devote much attention to Terra going into this next season, which I think makes this pretty obviously a bad change. I will say it's a bad change.
Fair enough.
I'm going to counterpoint on that one, actually. Right. Playing devil's advocate here. I feel like the reliability of just being able to pull your dudes out of space was too good. Like, to compare to Dreamer's summoning, who also summons models in space and then expects them to unbury. Aeonius, I mean, he was 10 stones, and I'll grant you that, but he basically provided a brain dead way to get your summons out, and your summons otherwise don't have really any drawbacks. Like, they're not slow, they're not stunned, nothing. They appear. And with Aeonius, not only did you get your summons out without having to try, you also got a fat stack of pass tokens for it. So you had clear activation control, which the pass token system had tried so hard to prevent that from being a problem again. And I get that, time control is Terra's theme, and that activating your opponent should still be something she does, but it was so easy. Like, if Aeonius flips black and ace, it still went off, and that didn't feel good as an opponent, where, like, no matter what you did, as long as Terra got her summon off, those summons were coming out and there was nothing you could do about it, and you were going to get out and activated. And I think removing the suit and giving it a TN was steps in the right direction, because for getting something out like that and having an advantage like that, having the cost of, yes, I must now actually consider what's in my hand to have, these summons out without effort and activation control, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Well, I'll definitely say it's steps in the wrong direction, because she went from being good to being very bad. So that's not, where are we heading if it's the right direction? Are we going to complete dumpster fire keyword? So, but again, that's just, I'm being semantic at that point. So I'm just being a dick.
Well, I would.
So let me counter your actual
I know.
points.
I mean, I don't disagree with you that Terra is currently bad. I just don't think the Aeonius change is the reason. Like, if Aeonius's ability had not changed here, people still wouldn't be playing Terra in GG1. And that's GG1's fault, not the nerf to Aeonius.
That's fair.
Like, not being able to place and things like that, and then her recover evidence interactions are terrible.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. But if she was playable in half of the strats, then she would be, like, I think being a good choice in 25% of the pools is a good place for a crew overall if you're playing the entire faction. I think being a good choice in 10% of the crew. Yeah, some of us actually play the whole faction, not just one keyword, Andre.
Weird.
Yeah, that's so crazy, weird. Right? But yeah, I think I'll definitely push back about what you said about being no brains, because it was definitely more similar to Dreamer than not, because it requires you to put fast on enemy models, which inherently is weird, and you're giving them a buff. No other crew does that. With Dreamer, your one of your actions went off successfully, and then you got your summon out. With Terra, you gave them a buff, and it's only range 6, and it has a target number that requires, and it's often stat 5. Only on Terra is it something close to reliable, and it's range 6, and she has no melee defenses at all. Unlike, like, she's just def 5, and you can attest to def 5 models dying. So
yeah.
I would definitely say it wasn't no brains. It was also a tense. This is the problem whenever these AWP discussions talk about summoners, is that they just see the outcome and not the this sort of machine that's creating this stuff. And with Terra, you had to have your target number that was very high for the summons. All summoning target numbers are high, but you also had target numbers on every single action you're doing throughout the crew. Whenever you're burying something, whenever you're doing pretty much everything but Aeonis had a target number. So often when you get to a point where you can put fast on an enemy model, you have maybe a 10 in your hand to do that. And you're just sort of crossing your fingers, right? In a stat 5. So it definitely required a lot of work to keep the engine going, to keeping things safe. And now you can still have the engine work. You can still get your summons out, but they will just die because you're just playing bad zip at that point. You'll still get across the board and it'll still be very quick. But my beef is that she's not unique within the faction anymore. Like, she's just kind of like bad zip and bad fix, which is an uninteresting change.
I do agree with both of your sides of the coin. Like, I think that both perspectives are fairly valid. Being on the receiving end of Tara a couple of times, I definitely go, thank God Ionis has some kind of like drawback now. But I think it might have been a little too far. Like, I think they could have maybe left the suit in, but give it a target number that's actually relevant. Agreed. Or what have you. But regardless, it's there, and we got to adjust to it. And unfortunately, according to God Cody, Terra is now dumpster fire trash. So move to Leviticus, everyone, and have a
that's
good
the
time
problem.
with that.
Leviticus is still awesome.
I know, right? Like he didn't get anything that's like made him any less brokenly efficient at what he does. All right, let's take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to finish up the remaining factions errata and then get to our picks on the good, bad, and the ugly.
Howdy friends, here on the third floor you'll find us playing Malifaux and other games on mats by Mars. They are scratch resistant, waterproof, wet erase Marco compatible, and lighter than neoprene. These mats use a new material that almost eliminates any glare. Mats by Mars gives you over 40 designs to choose from. Pick a mat size, pick a design, then choose an overlay like the one for Marvel Crisis Protocol or Malifaux 3rd Edition, Strats and Schemes. It's going to speed up your deployment and the placement of strategy and objective markers. Until the end of June 2020, you can use the new promo code THIRDFLOOR620 to get a 10% discount on your next order. In the notes, you can ask for the Third Floor Wars logo to be put on your mat for free. Again, use the promo code THIRDFLOOR620, that's THIRDFLOOR620, to get a 10% discount. All the details are in the show notes.
Let's go ahead and wrap up the general talk about errata with some of the other hot topics and outliers. We had quite the few shake-up on a few models. Archie got knocked around a little bit for what role he now fills. We already mentioned briefly that Mama Z got some pretty sizable nerfs, depending on who you talk to. Arcanists have to learn to play their faction now. And then there's all the 10T adjustments. So let's kind of start with Mama Z. Andre is the Neverborn player here. Have you actually put her on the table, or are you like Nakima only?
No, I have.
What are your thoughts on her?
I have put Mama Z on the table a few times, actually. And I think that the changes to her were all reasonable. I feel like upping her secondary master cost was an important move, just because people enjoyed taking her as a secondary master so much. And it wasn't so much that it was broken, it's that people were doing it and not thinking about it. And I think that, less of a balance, more of a, come on guys, try to put some effort in your list building. And I think that was a step in the right direction. And then the other one, the big change being Eyes in the Night actually needs line of sight to the model she'd like to cast from, I think is also a step in the right direction. I have had frustrating games into Mama Z players where she is just like behind a huge building and just casting out of her dudes, and you don't really have a way to get around. I mean, I had wings, but for most people, it's difficult to get to her and actually
another priceless reaction from Jesse.
Yeah.
There.
Oh, she's behind a building? I have no leap in my faction except a master? Oh.
Exactly. That feels bad. But now that she actually has to see the people she's casting from, it provides both a weakness to her that now she actually be visible, and I think that will help a lot of shooting crews out. And at the same time, it also provides counterplay, because if I don't want you to cast out a bad juju, if I put a big model in her face, she has to spend an AP walking around to see him, or she has to try and use a different model. So I think it introduced some key points of counterplay with that, and I'm all about that. I think that's good.
I think the thing that I like most about the changes is that it kind of increased the skill ceiling a little bit. Like, she was already kind of a skill ceiling, a high skill ceiling master in general. Like, yeah, you can just obey people to charge in places and stuff like that. But the sheer power of obeys opens up all kinds of crazy shenanigans you can do, especially with her ability to arc and stuff like that. But like you said, just being able to hide away and I get to do what I want for freezies. It wasn't fun to face on the table, and now you actually have to put thought into your positioning for Zoraida, if not the rest of her crew, which you already obviously had to do previously. For other faction, going to the other faction that got really hit for a second, talk about Arcanists. That's definitely been something that's been polarizing. I feel some people are like, okay, they got what they should have, and other people have been like, oh my god, we can't play Arcanists anymore. Cody, you're the only one of the four of us who mains a faction who has a model that generates soul stones on the reg for free, basically. Do you think the Soulstone miners took too big of a hit, especially considering prospectors were basically untouched?
Definitely. If I had my druthers, they would have just went from armor 2 to armor 1. That would have been fine. This is like a crazy rule. This until the start of your next activation, it's ignored for friendly strats and schemes. That's just weird. That's like, I don't know. That seems way over. Way too big of an adjustment.
I'm curious as to like why didn't they use insignificant as a language in that? It's like until the start of this next activation, this model is insignificant.
Because then it would benefit
and at the same
you sometimes too, instead of yeah.
Oh, I gotcha. I think I would have been okay with that though, because like all right, here's a Soulstone mine. We're totally going to like take away your ability to have any kind of functionality when it unburies, but at least it's not a liability when it unburies too.
Yeah, I don't know. This one seems a little heavy-handed in that I don't know what you use a Soulstone miner for now. I guess the generating stones is good, but if it's not scoring points and generating stones, you just should have brought more stones.
I feel like they're really good as anti-scheme runners at the moment. Like I played a game against Dan Brown recently, and he showed me the power of a Soulstone miner being able to just pop up and go, "Hey, that scheme runner you had over there, it's got some problems now." So,
and that's also why, to not be insignificant, they could pop up and eat a scheme.
That's
eat a marker because they can still take the interact. I think they meant to, bury the miner. They wanted to make a point of, hey guys, you've been running this way too hard. Play the rest of your faction.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I think it's still usable. It still has place. Our most frequent Arcanist player, Jeremy, I was talking to him about it, and he's like, yeah, I'm still going to find some use for it. But it's definitely not going to be the auto take that it has been. And I think that's what the faction really needs, because there's a lot of really cool models in Arcanists that were just being ignored because they were cheaper, versatile Machina getting the job done.
All right. Speaking of the cheaper, easier, versatile Machina, let's talk about the other one, the Steam Arachnid Swarms. They lost the stat and the built-in onslaught. I personally think that's fair. Some people say they're now worthless. Thoughts?
I was tired of getting Fist of the North Starred by Spider Swarms, so I think this was a change for the better. If
you're now my favorite person, Andre, I appreciate that reference.
It really hits it on the nose, though. It feels really bad.
It totally does. Totally does. Just exploding people's heads.
And it came down to like when a Hoffman gives that thing fast, and then it hits you with effectively melee 6 times with plus flips to damage. You're just like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to consistently do into this, and I feel like bringing the stat down was a big thing, but losing the onslaught was really the built-in onslaught. Like, they still have access to it. They can still flip it. If you want to relive the glory days, you can slap Soulstone Cash on it and burn stone for the mask if you just got to have it. But I feel like they're not so unbelievably reliable that they're just going to see play in places that I wouldn't have expected them, like Karis, who has access to decent beaters, but was like, why would I take Elijah when I can just take this thing that eats people? And so I feel like that was...
And they were correct. Yeah. That was the worst part.
Absolutely. And so I feel like this was a good move. Obviously it hurts for people that were relying heavily on the swarms, but I think to Jesse's point, Arcanists are going to have to sit down and be like, oh man, now I have to use my own actually good models.
Yeah, I think this makes them no longer... Like, you could take another beater for the same cost and get more mileage. And so I think that's the comparison a lot of people that I've heard so far have been making is like, but now it's just not as good. I'm like, well, yeah, but most of those other beaters aren't also going to be able to switch hit and be a really good scheme runner at the same time.
Yeah.
It
did everything.
And that was the thing, is that they were just too good at everything. So they knocked down the beating part. And so you have still a really good utility model that can still drop 2 markers a turn, can leave engagement with a walk. 2 markers of the turn by bonus action walking between the markers, which is always my first go-to for a scheme runner is, can they do 2 markers a turn?
Right, absolutely.
But yeah, it's still a really strong model, and so I think it's still got a lot of use, but they're going to have to look at the other models, which is good.
You mentioned Soulstone Cash, Andre. They made a minor change to that, where it's now enemy models they get Soulstones off of. I think it was needed. Everyone else agree, or do we have a disagreement there?
I mean, I don't think it hit the Soulstone Cache upgrade where it really needed to be hit, I would say. I think that attuned needed to be the minion buff. I feel like
I agree with that.
I feel like there are too many enforcers. The Peacekeeper really sticks out in my mind. Too many models that make too much use of soulstones that were designed around not having access to soulstones, and then giving access to soulstone use makes them dicey to not be overpowered. And honestly, I'm not really sure. Beyond the edge case of the Soulstone Cache bearer dying and granting a Soulstone, there wasn't a ton of friendly models dying engines. I mean, I didn't see any Sandeep players just exploding Gammon left and right.
It was Colette where, like, the big thing came
Right,
out.
yeah, it was the Doves, which, I mean, the Doves were kind of annoying, and I could see how, like, farming up more Soulstones could be problematic, but at the end of the day, Colette's spending a lot of time and energy resummoning Doves, and as far as things you could threaten me with the Soulstone Cache, that was not really at the top of my problem list. But I still think that you're going to get plenty of mileage out of Soulstone Cache as an Arcanist. Like, that change, as an Arcanist player, it wouldn't have phased me, like, at all. I think the big issue with Soulstone Cache that I have is that rules is worded right now, you will still get 2 Soulstones if you have 2 Soulstone Cache bearers near an enemy model that dies. And I think that was kind of the specific gamey problem. But that's still in play, and I still think it's a great upgrade.
Moving to Resurrectionists, we have Archie's Leap and Move got nerfed. His Hurl Corpse got nerfed slightly. He lost Ruthless. So lots of changes there. But he has a bonus action now that allows him to hit people on negatives. And they gave him Rush. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg for Resurrectionists in general. The Valedictorian's now +1 cost. Manos' upgrade got nerfed to basically unplayability. Which is fine. I think it needed to be there. Reva is starting to be the new hotness. Ha ha ha. All in all, I think the Reser players can't really complain about the situations that have happened in the results of this errata. I like pretty much every change that was implemented. I have no problems with Archie's role change. What about you, gentlemen? Do you think that they have any issues there I'm not seeing?
I think Reser's pretty clearly won the errata. There's a hot take, I guess. I mean, I think it's pretty hard to. I mean, they got one of their masters got a significant buff, and then Archie and Manos, who were considered sort of the big bad boys, got some side grades. I would say that Manos, even though he nerfed your really bad MPE problems with him, that making him better into Levy, which in my opinion is one of the best top 5 masters in the game, is not a bad place to be as a keyword. Like, I think that sort of side grade change for him is like kind of, well, it's obviously a downgrade in every matchup except for Levy almost. So I think it's a good place to be.
Yeah, there's a couple of other keywords where like being able to have access to that Lantern of Souls is going to be very, very useful. But it's went from being this is an always useful, retainer upgrade, to being a occasionally useful retainer upgrade, which again, I don't have a problem with. But it is a big change because, like, you can't do the Wonder Twins anymore.
Good.
Yeah, well, yeah. Again, I don't think that's a problem. I really don't. Quick aside on Bayou, Brennan First Mate got some nerfs, but the big one for me, sorry Oliver, was Ma Tuckett can't focus bomb anymore, so you actually have to play her. Which again, I don't think that's a problem. Combined with Bryn's changes of Soulstone Miner's changes, do you think that it's dropped her down a little too much, or do you think she still has the tools required to get the job done, Jesse?
So, yeah.
Especially with 12 cups of coffee. Like that, not forgetting that as well.
I think she still has a strong keyword with a lot of nice depth and variety of play. I think your go-to option, your easy mode button, is not there in the same way anymore, which was just jam up a bunch of focus and send them out and kill. So you're still going to you can still do it the one time, and so you can still get a nice start going. So is it a nerf? Yes, I think they're still totally playable. As somebody who is looking at them on paper, You have to talk to Oliver on that one or some of our other Bayou folks. But I know that I have made some noise about that in the past.
Well, last and certainly not least for some people, specifically me, as it's my main, we have 10 Thunders, who did not get hit as bad as I personally thought they were going to. Monks now work the way they should. Chiaki, Kitty Dumont now works the way they should. Lust got a buff, which it's really only Minako who got a nerf, and then Yasunori got a role change, less than a nerf. Masked Agent is no longer completely and utterly busted. It's just really strong now. So, do you guys think that they didn't get hit hard enough, maybe? Or do you think that the balance changes are just enough to kind of keep them relevant and powerful, but without being obscene?
Well, you missed the number one that people are going to be clamoring for, which was the change to Shenlong.
Fermented
River.
Well, that was the monks.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a necessary change, and it now works as they should have. Like, there was never a world where Shenlong should have been able to missile into somebody and practically guarantee a kill, and you couldn't stop it. Like, that never should have been a case. So I consider that as a functional change as what should have been, especially with Fermented River style, the Falling Rave kick giving him an extra 6 inches on his charge. It was so obscenely overdone. And with all the changes that they've made to dial it back in, you now want to use the other styles. You now aren't going to just missile Shenlong in and be like, haha, I'd kill your master, and you can't, and that's the end of this discussion.
Yeah. Overall, I like it. Absolutely agree. Shenlong needed that adjustment. I think that's an okay adjustment as well. As a semi-frequent Asami player who would bring in Minako Rei almost every time, I wish Katashiro didn't cost as much as they do now, but I get it. It's like, all right, yeah, that's fair.
I think the thing I like less about the Minako change is I don't like that her upgrade giving trigger, which I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, Karmic Debt maybe.
Karmic Debt.
I don't like that trigger is now on success and not after resolving, because especially considering the concept of it's like, oh, well, you're trying to hurt me, so here's the karmic retribution for that. If you actually get hurt, you don't get karmic retribution, which makes no fluff sense.
Fluff-wise, that is borked, and that's bugged me as well. It definitely reduces her defensive threat, that game going on. I think you're just going to see her a lot less outside of Last Blossom or outside of a case where you have more hand control. So I'm probably going to run her less in Asami, run her more in Yoko and Last Blossom.
Which is good because she's still kept versatile for some reason.
I don't
I thought she was
that.
the single most OP model in the game, so I'm glad she got hit. Yeah, definitely. I could have cared less about Shenlong changes or anything as long as Minako got a big boot stomp. I hate that chick. Ugh.
I feel like the changes were kind of because she went through most of the 3E beta not being versatile, and it all made sense. And then they're just kind of like slapped on there at the end. They just wanted 10 Thunders to have the most versatile models in the game or something. I don't know, but the walk back, where that is to say, where she doesn't function well as a summoner outside of Last Blossom, or if she brings her boyfriend Odoto in,
I agree.
I think that's fine. I think that because otherwise, for 8 stones, you too can bring her into like a McCabe crew or to a Mayfang crew, anybody who's generating scrap, and just be like, all right, cool, you don't have to hire any scheme runners this game. I'm just going to spam Katashiro. And for 8 stones, that was really, really dumb. And you also can't really stop her from doing it previously because of the way that the Karmic Debt worked. Because if you attack her, I mean, that's just a bad idea. So you can't really attack her, and she's going to get those 2 Katashiro out, and that felt bad. At least if you have to hire an Odoto out of keyword as well, you're paying 19 stones for that engine, which is, as an opponent, a lot less annoying in concept. I mean, you still get Odoto out of the deal, but I think that this left the faction overall in a much better place. I'm actually surprised they didn't touch Fuhatsu.
I'm surprised by that, too.
I feel like I see him in every 10 Thunders crew I've ever laid down against a table, and the fact that they were like, yeah, he's fine. He does what we want him to do. Surprised me.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see him a lot more with Corrupted. I don't know. If you're asking me, Craig, Ray, your initial question was if you think 10 Thunders need more nerfs. Sure. I don't know, but I think this is a good place. I would have liked if, I don't know if anything was nerfed into the dirt. I know a lot of people don't like Yasunori now.
Yeah, but he's still useful. It's just that he's not like, an auto take, like, oh, well, I have 10 stones. What do I do with it? Yasunori, of course,
Was he 10 stones? Oh.
He was 10 stones. Yeah, one of his nerfs is that he was... One of his nerfs was that he's now 11 stones.
They brought him up to rider cost.
He's just now 11.
He was the cheap, not quite rider. Now he's rider cost. So
basically. Yeah, Jesse, I want to talk about what we thought are the good, the bad, and the ugly here. As a 10T player, my only why did you do this bad moment was Monaco's defensive trigger, which we already discussed. Just it's the fluff thing that's killing me. I think the minors were an ugly, and I feel that could have been more elegantly handled. And I felt that the way they handled Archie was actually quite good. I like that they changed that they did the role reversal. Or the role shift, I should say. And all the nerfs made sense, and then the buffs that they gave him also made sense. So it feels really good to me. What do you think? What would you select as your top picks for good, bad, and ugly for this errata? Or the fact scheme, whichever. Just go for it. Let the hatred flow through you. Or, happy bunny feelings, whichever.
For the good, I think overall, they've adjusted the models that we're seeing too much play to the detriment of the faction. And that fits for the miners, that fits for the Pale Rider and Guild. Models that were eating up table space and meta space that really, could be taken up by other models as well and actually explore a faction. I like the idea of really exploring what's out there. So some bad, I think, is just I wish they were pushing more for consistency rather than going back to the 2E method when it comes to FAQ and errata. Meaning, establish a rule by which you can resolve questions and problems for texts and for weird things that come up. And this is like, our state effects and things like that. Establish a rule for the TO to make a decision by. Don't make individual model decisions that don't give consistency. Because every time we reduce that consistency, we make the game harder and harder for new players to enjoy and for TOs to manage. And I think we're just sort of drifting away from that. Ugly, I'm not sure that I have an ugly. We have a couple of gripes about strats and schemes that could maybe be cleaned up a bit. But I think mostly we're in the good with some kind of gray zone bads. Feeling pretty good.
Cool. Andre?
I would have to agree with Jesse on the bad. I feel like an FAQ that leaves me asking more questions than when I had started could definitely use some relooking at and some changes. Specifically with another and things like that, or how the falling damage isn't consistent with killing something through hazardous and things like that. But as far as the good, I liked a lot of like the what I call the public enemy nerfs, where like Stitched, those got hit, but in such a way that I still feel like I'd be excited to take them as a Dreamer player. And actually for me, I actually feel okay taking them as a Dreamer player now. There was kind of an honor bound, God, do I really have to do this to people? And now I feel like I can take them without feeling like a jerk. And I feel the same way about Shenlong. Like I previously was not considering Shenlong because I feel like a bandwagoner. But now that he's in a good adaptable spot without just mindlessly spamming drunken kung fu everywhere, I feel like there's a lot more intrigue in how he will play, and I think that's going to be a lot more fun, and I've actually been considering running Shenlong more now. And so it's my good. As far as the ugly goes, I would have to say the Soulstone miners and things like that, where they hit things too hard, because it's always going to feel bad, even if they do fix it later, to have to walk back nerfs. Isn't a good feeling, I would say.
Cody?
Yeah, I think overall I'm pretty excited for this season. I think these strats are pretty cool, and I've definitely been reinvigorated to sort of discover how my faction plays through the strats and schemes in this new season. So I'm definitely excited about that. I'm glad that they were willing to Also, one of the good things about this errata that we sort of haven't really touched on is I liked that they took this long for it to come out from the release of 3, and it definitely feels like it was a little more they let things roll up a little bit, at least with FAQs. Like in my dream world, like FAQs would be something that comes out frequently, but the errata would take, they would sit on those changes for a while and really see how the meta adjusts to things becoming more popular and stuff like that. So I'm excited to play a lot for sure. And I think the strats and stuff are pretty cool. The exception to that is the public enemies, which I think is just really bad. And I hope TOs don't put it in. Like if I go to a 3-round event and public enemies is one of them, I'm going to have an eyebrow up because I think it's really bad. And the ugly, so I complained about my faction quite a bit. And I think it's, on one hand, I'm excited to play some different stuff, which I think that was very cool. The one thing I don't like is when things I don't really care so much about external faction balance. I feel like that's just such a meta thing that I can't really see. I'm not the developer. I'm like a player. So I can't, like, for example, when we talk about 10 Thunders, I can't really talk about like, what needs to be, what is really the problem there, because I'm not seeing all the machinery behind it. But internal faction balance, I have like a very in-depth understanding of. And when I sell this game to other people, I often say it's the most internally faction balanced game I've ever played. That all of the keywords play like you would see them on the table. They play like they read. And I feel like there was a couple of changes that might have lessened that, at least within my faction. And but then they also had some successes, right? Because like Archie and Manos were everywhere, and I feel like they won't be now. Same with the Soulstone Miners. So I get that that's always going to be a process. So for me, that's like a little ugly, if you will. But overall, I'm pretty freaking excited, dude.
Would you guys say that there's any like complete like misses, that like things that you were like, okay, I'm really excited for this fact and errata to come out, this really needs to get addressed, and then nothing?
I might be alone in this, but every time I turn on the NC chat, they're talking about that take the hit ability. Does that not need an FAQ? That ability makes no sense to me. Like every time, you're always like, okay, it works this way, but it works this way. None of which seems intuitive to me. So I wish that I guess I'm asking for an errata rather than a FAQ, because it just doesn't make sense. Like
Are
4
we
different ways.
NC chats. I don't remember talking about that for a
same
while.
One, dude.
It's been a minute, but I know what he's talking about with like, does terrifying trigger, like, what happens when like, you take the hit in this scenario? And it just seems like it's a recurring topic enough that like, okay, maybe this needs to be clarified at some point.
Well, I think that speaks to Cody's desire for frequent facts. And I think they've done a good job. I mean, they built a game that we all love. And they've done a good job of rotting it, and it is still one of the best balanced minis games out there, no question. And what we are really doing is just griping on the little bits because everything else is fine. So it's easy fucking. But I wish that we had. I guess this could be my ugly, I suppose. I really wish we had more of a more frequent forum presence from somebody who will come in and say, "Hey, this question has been bumping around for about a month now. People are losing their minds. Here's a call from the heavens. Like here's a decision." And
right, and there doesn't have to be necessarily a fact released on it. It can be part of the regularly scheduled fact that's upcoming.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, even waiting 6 months can be frustrating if it's something where if they already know the decision they're going to make. I get making sure they're looking at all the angles, but not that many questions like that really come up. There are lots of questions from people who just haven't really come to terms with the reality. And then there are the questions that really has all the people who are working hard, the Doug Bowmans of the world who are trying to figure out how the rules work. And we're like, yeah, flip a coin is what we're down to. And those questions I wish they would come in and just give answers to. Flip the coin for us, please.
That's fair. Yeah, just make a decision so we can stop debating it, please. All right, well, we're going to take one last break and we're going to come back and wrap up.
Hi, I'm Doug. And I'm a $5 patron of Third Floor Wars because Craig promised he'd play as the Arcanist if the Patreon reached $300. I want to see him suffer.
Howdy, folks. Want to give a quick shout out to some of our newest patrons. Big thank you to Marcus Weiss, John Aker, Marcus Moore, DrawnX, Joshua Story, and Peter Poor. You and all of the other patrons are the reason we're able to push out all of this content, and we appreciate it.
All right, gentlemen, I gotta say I'm pretty happy overall. I think we did a pretty decent job of not being too heavy-handed by and large. The shakeup is definitely going to be interesting. Andre, would you agree with that?
I definitely would. Even as someone who was in the faction I feel like got hit the hardest by some of the changes, I still feel like the changes they did implement overall were positive and for a healthier, more fun game. And I am definitely excited to move into GG1.
Cody and Jesse, we kind of already got your feeling on that. You both are very excited for moving into the GG1 season. Any hot takes before we sign off today?
No, sir.
No. Excited to get the chance to play new stuff.
Always excited to get the chance to play English. I speak it. Always excited always excited to have a chance to play new stuff. I can say this phrase, I promise you. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to have you gents on the show. Did anyone have any plugs they want to put out for some projects they're currently working on that might be hitting the interwebs?
I got a podcast with my buddy Swamp Fiends where he's like new to the game, and we talk about the road from new to getting into tournaments and then getting better. So check that out.
Nice. So do you just look that up on like Spotify? Do you have a website for it or anything like that?
It's available on everything.
Okay. There you go. All right. Well, that's a wrap then. We thank you very much for joining us today, gents.
Thank you.
You can say thanks.
Thanks, Ray. It was a good time.
I mean, if you didn't enjoy your time, then now's the time to say it too. It's like, screw you.
No, I want you to keep that long pause for the video, please, just so people understand the field. Yeah.
The awkwardness
just
really drills it in.
Personally, I was reading the outro from Craig here at the third floor. I was like, wait, is he going to read that?
No, I was not going to read that, but from Craig alone here because I don't exist. All right.
You're actually just the Jekyll to his Hyde. You know,
I really kind of am. Or which one's the monster? Jekyll, right?
They're both the monster.
No, Hyde's
the monster. I'm the Hyde to his. I'm the Hyde to his Jekyll. That's the way it is.
Exactly.
That's what it is. I'm the monster he keeps in the closet. All right. Well, that's a wrap then. From Craig and I here on the third floor, as always, please like and subscribe if you enjoy our content, or consider supporting us on Patreon to get early access to all our podcasts and more. You can find us on Facebook or at thirdfloorwars.com, and you can find more tabletop talk at any of your favorite streaming services. Heads up for some future episodes, still trying to drum up some interest here. We've got started the Solo Tactica podcast series, and we'll be discussing and answering your phone questions and other general wargaming questions, so please feel free to send any of those in to tabletoptalk@thirdfloorwars.com with the subject line questions. This is Ray. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time on the third floor.
Be sure to check out our shop on thirdfloorwars.com for the latest gaming apparel and gear. While you're there, check out how the USFO Tour is shaping up. How does your conference compare to the others in the United States? Where do you rank nationally? Get those models built, painted, and on the table so we can see you at the US Masters Invitational in October of 2020. Also, rate and write a review on this podcast for us. It really helps us find people almost as cool as you are. Thanks for listening. Howdy friend, Craig here. Is this episode making you realize you need to buy some models? Gadzooks Gaming is my favorite online retailer because of their large selection, killer prices, and great customer service. Don't you hate buying an entire crew box when you only need one model? Gadzooks sells crew box models individually and saves you a ton of money. They even have free shipping to the US and Canada if you spend $100 or more. Swing by gadzooksgaming.com and make sure you tell them Craig from the third floor sent you. All the details are in the show notes. Howdy folks, Craig here. Now if you love gadgets as much as we do, you're going to love the new Third Floor Wars Gadget Bundle from Schooner Labs. Branded with the logo of your favorite podcast, it comes with 2 measuring multi-tools, a compass stepper for those tight and important movements, along with a compact dashboard to track your turn, strat, and scheme scoring along with your soul stones and pass tokens. It is the perfect bundle for anyone who plays Malifaux or just wants to look cool while doing it. The link is in the show notes. Check them out and help support your favorite gaming podcast.